This is what you should feel. You are what you should feel.
So this is an escalation of activity which actually began last fall, when I felt like I was being watched while walking my children to the bus stop in the morning. I'm fairly used to spoopy stuff, so I generally don't get in a kerfuffle easily. As of the spring, this observant presence began imitating my closest pets, which I was later relieved by finding out my significant other and teenage son had both noticed, and we had each assumed we were losing our minds. We have each heard the distinct, recognizable voice of one of our animals, only to have them be sleeping in our house, or walk up and make it awkwardly obvious that it definitely wasn't them. I only went looking for my pet the first time, and while looking, I got the distinct feeling that it was not my pet, and to get my ass in the house. So we always search the house before assuming someone escaped now. Since then, at times when I hear the calls, I get a chill because it sounds like my pet, but it doesn't feel like my pet, if that makes sense. This happened last night. I have no way to confirm my SO's account, aside from the security camera in the bedroom showing where I actually was and when, including when they called my phone. So I woke my SO up after he fell asleep on the couch, told him to come to bed around 4 a.m. So he's like, cool, I'll be right there. I go ahead upstairs. He calls for me a couple of minutes later, and I don't answer. So he calls my phone twice, and I answer the second time. I was sound asleep. According to the bedroom camera, I had been asleep for nearly an hour at the time he interacted with me. He was extremely unsettled once he realized I had been sound asleep. I've also informed my teen that if he hears me calling for him when he knows I shouldn't be home, not to answer, and text me instead. So this happened in December or late November 2020. I was a few minutes late for college, and my mum was with me. However, when I arrived, the fire alarm had gone off and everyone from the main building had evacuated. I didn't know if my building had evacuated, so I went across the road and in the main entrance to ask a staff member what was going on. He told me that it was just the main building that evacuated and not mine. So I went upstairs and went to my class. Later on I spoke to my mum, and I can't remember if she messaged me or if she told me this when she met me after college, but she asked where I went at the start of the day. I asked what she meant, and she said she saw me walking outside towards another building instead of going to class. She said they had the same bag, clothes, hair, height. They were literally identical. I told her I went to class, and she didn't really believe me at first. But I know I went to class, and eventually she believed me. She probably thinks it was just some strange lookalike, but she doesn't know about doppelgangers and mimics. And after reading some stories on here, and other paranormal posts on Reddit, I'm sure it was something paranormal my mum saw. To make it scarier, I know from folklore that seeing a doppelganger of yourself usually meant you were going to die. However, I didn't know what it meant if someone else had seen your doppelganger. So I searched it up, and it means that the person a doppelganger was impersonating is or will become very ill. I've had health issues all my life, but never anything serious like a disease, and I didn't have any I knew of at the time. However, just a week ago, I found out I have gum disease, and it has been causing me to feel nauseous and to have pain in my stomach as well as a sore mouth. I had to go to an emergency appointment with my local dentist. I know that the disease is due to natural causes. However, the fact that my mum seeing the doppelganger meant I was going to be ill is just too much of a coincidence. Due to my OCD, I regularly see hallucinations, and had I had seen it myself, I would think it was a hallucination. However, because my mum saw it, I believe her, because she doesn't have a mental illness, she doesn't do drugs, and hasn't even smoked in over 20 years. She also wasn't drunk, and is not the type of person to make something up. Edit. Someone in the comments told me to add this to the story, so I am. We were not wearing uniforms, because if so, then they could have been someone that just looked like me. We wear our own clothes, and I was wearing a random jacket, some outdated Adidas shoes, and a retro 1980s bag. Also, not many people look like me, and I've never seen someone else at my college that looks like me. Never mind wearing the same random clothes. My mum followed them because she was so sure it was me. However, she lost sight of them. Also, I know the doppelganger didn't cause me to have gum disease. I just thought it was a strange coincidence that I had an illness so soon after the encounter with potentially a doppelganger, and that it predicted it. Like I said though, it was probably just a coincidence. So I first have to explain the story as best I can. Basically, my family and I moved into this house a while ago, maybe like 8 years or so. Ever since we moved out, my family swears they keep seeing things around the house. I've actually moved out with my boyfriend not that long ago, but I still visit very often. Very specifically, my family thinks they see a ghost around the house that looks exactly like me, and it's freaking me out. I know it's not me that they're seeing, because the times where they see this ghost don't make sense, and sometimes I'm not even at home. It's happened a couple of times, but I'll just write down a few examples. The first time it happened, I was playing on my computer in my parents' room when I noticed my mum walked down the hallway to my room. She called out my name, and I asked her what's up. She came out really confused because, according to her, she had followed me all the way from the kitchen into the closet in my room. When she got to the closet, there was no one there. I had been on the computer the whole time. I was even on it when I saw her pass her room to go into my own. When she told me this, it really freaked me out. And I just told her I didn't want to keep talking about it. I get scared super easily. The second time, I was helping Mum out with groceries. She was in the garage, bringing bags in, and I was in the kitchen putting everything up. While I was putting something up, she came in all mad, saying that she was struggling to get some bags, and I was just standing beside her, watching her struggle. But that wasn't me. Apparently, I was watching her struggling to pick up some bags from the truck floor. And when she turned around to ask me for help, I just stared her down. Again, that really scared me. Another time, my dad was telling me about something that happened when he was taking care of my sisters while my mum and I were out. Now, my dad does not believe in any kind of ghost or supernatural thing, but apparently, while taking care of my sisters, my dad heard what sounded like someone trying to open the sliding door that leads to the backyard. He immediately got up and went to check on the door to make sure no one wanted to break in or something. But when he got there, the door was shaking by itself very violently. It looked like someone was trying really hard to open the door, and had the lock stick been on the other side to keep it closed, the door would have slid open. It stopped about a few seconds after when my dad got there. Even my dad got scared, and I've never seen him this freaked out before. My two little sisters also heard the door. Now, I had personally never had a supernatural experience in the house, but the first few weeks before I moved out, I was home alone. I was taking a shower and I heard a huge bang. It sounded like the front door had been swung open, and then after that, it started sounding like someone was opening and closing doors and cabinets. I was so scared because it sounded like someone had broken into the house. I was defenseless, and in the freaking shower. So I got out of the shower, grabbed my phone, and called my mum, crying. All the while, doors and cabinets were still opening and closing. My dad got onto the cameras that they have in the house, and they didn't see anyone. There was no one in the house, and nothing was being moved around. It stopped after my dad said that through the phone. Those are some of the examples of what goes on. It terrifies me to think that one day I could possibly be staring right at someone who looks exactly like me in the middle of the night. I've never seen her, and I don't want to. What could it mean that the ghost looks exactly like me? Background: I was around 15 when this happened. I lived in a house with an upper floor and complete basement. The staircase to the second floor has no door at either ends. The staircase to the basement only had a door at the entrance, only on the first floor. Both staircases were L-shaped and had landings separating the turns. The space where the staircases met was as large as 2 door frames smushed together. At the time, my mum was busy working on her computer on the second floor. My dad was running an errand, but I didn't know that piece of info until he got home. The doppelganger was posing as my dad. To avoid confusion, I will refer to it as him in my story. My dad will be Dad. Now that that is out of the way, here is the actual story. I went downstairs to the first floor to probably get some water or a snack. I don't remember. As I approached the last few stairs, I caught him exiting the basement. He was standing on the hardwood floor of the first floor, only a step away from the door. Being the nice daughter I was, I went to say hi instead of doing my task. As I approached him, he went back down the stairs to the basement at a familiar pace. He wasn't rushed or anything like that when he descended the stairs. Him didn't say a single word to me. I was confused but thought nothing of it. I followed him, but I stopped by the door frame. At this point, he had traveled a few steps from the door. Him kept eye contact with me, but angled his body in a way that made sure he wouldn't fall. I was in the process of saying hey to him until I was struck by electricity. This electricity felt raw and alluring, though it felt sour and very wrong as it pulsed throughout my body. Like it didn't belong in this universe, but not in the evil sense. This electricity had only lasted for a second or two before fading. For whatever the reason, I couldn't stop talking. It was like my off switch was broken. I knew that I didn't need to fear him despite that electricity. Maybe that is why I blathered on. Who knows? I certainly didn't. As I continued to talk, our eye contact never broke. Then, I hear my mum yelling down to me. "Who are you talking to?" she asked. I yelled back up, "I'm talking to Dad." After a few moments, I hear my mum walking down to the landing of the staircase leading to the second floor. She told me that Dad was on an errand. Just want to remind you that my eyes remained on him while I talked with my mum. Him eventually reached the landing and had his entire body facing me. Then my brain finally began registering what my mum had said, though that was short-lived when I heard my dad thumping up the stairs to our porch. My mum was walking the rest of the way down and asked me again who I was talking to. Since she was closer, I looked up to her to respond until I heard the doorknob twist. I looked out to the front door, then turned to face my mum and said, "See, I was talking to Dad," or something along those lines. Coincidentally, my dad had just entered the door when my mum had made it to the first floor. The doppelganger was nowhere in sight when I turned my attention back to the landing. My dad looked so confused as to what I said, and my mum stare. Then I quickly went back upstairs, worried about having to explain myself further. That never happened, but I was still very confused about what had just happened. Sometime between my blathering and my conversation with my mum, I was sitting on the floor instead of standing. I also swear that I saw something like worry or surprise register on him after the electricity. It may have also been wishful thinking. I swear to you guys that this is a true story, and I remember it in vivid detail, as you can probably tell by the reading. I also wanted to add that the doppelganger was in a recognizable outfit of a thick, long green and white jersey with faded jeans. My dad wore this outfit often, especially during the winter. My dad was in some sort of long-sleeved red t-shirt and lightly worn jeans. This has never happened before or since, though I would like to say that the doppelganger loves to taunt me from time to time. There are occasions when I hear my parents' voices off in the distance, then being told that they are on some sort of errands. Sadly, I don't have evidence of it being the doppelganger, or a ghost, or something else entirely. Have you guys ever come face to face with a doppelganger? So, a few years ago, I had this strange encounter. My wife is a key element in this, so I'm going to describe her just a bit. She has super long black hair that she always kept in a bun. She wore these pajama pants that were patterned like cartoon sky with clouds and all that. She wore a robe that was red and blue horizontal stripes. Also, she doesn't often smile. So I went to bed with my black cat curled up next to me. My wife stayed up and watched TV. I dreamt I was in hospital with Tyrion Lannister and Lord Varys from the Game of Thrones show, and there's a sick man in the bed. I decided to go wait in the car, and while I'm waiting, a tornado comes and I wake up. Now, when I wake up, I notice my wife is lying across my legs, staring at me and smiling. And I thought, WTF is she doing? She's so weird sometimes. Because sometimes she might do weird stuff like that. So I started to tell her about my dream. She's smiling at me the whole time with her head tilted down slightly, ominously, and I suddenly noticed that my cat is gone. I didn't say anything about it, but then my wife says, I put her in leeches, and starts gently tickling my belly with long, sharp nails. I chuckled and said, "What?" And she said it again, tickling my belly, and I noticed that her robe and pants pattern were swapped, and her hair was down and not in a bun. Then I noticed her smile was just a tad wider than it should be, and I started to become terrified and woke up again, my cat curled up next to me. The strange thing is that I'm not the only one who has encountered this entity. 2 others have also seen this wicked version of my wife in a semi-dreamlike state. I swear to the gods that I was awake during this encounter. Nothing about it felt like a dream, but I woke up a second time. That's never happened to me before. Has anyone else had an encounter like this before? These are 2 eerily similar doppelganger experiences. My earliest encounter occurred around 3 or 4 years ago. I had decided to stay with my aunt. Her house was big, with 3 baths and various rooms. I was on the 2nd floor, alone, when everything happened. So, I was working on a video when my youthful step-aunt appeared. I followed her into her room, excited to show her what I had done with my phone. My younger cousin was also in her arms. Both of them were female. She wasn't in the room when I walked in. I looked behind the door, thinking she was playing a joke on me. Nobody was present. I dashed downstairs to find her, but she claimed she had not gone upstairs. It was a scary experience, so I stayed downstairs. I had the following incident around 2 or 3 years ago. I'm upstairs in a house by myself once more. My family's home wasn't substantial. My elder sister then arrived, bearing our little sister. I was probably too lazy to fetch something, so I called her from across the room. Before exiting the room, she walked up to the mirror and remained there still without responding to me. I followed her out of the room as she went at a slow pace. She was nowhere to be found. I dashed downstairs once again, where my elder sister was showering. My younger sister was downstairs too, playing with her toys. I was creeped out once more and stayed downstairs. Numerous parallels between these two situations made them seem like falsehoods and fables. I was alone in a house that belonged to a relative. The people that came upstairs were all women, and one of them was holding a female toddler. Both rooms had a bed with a mirror pointing straight in the direction of the bed. It happened in the afternoon. And if it's any use, here are some things to consider. My aunt kept my grandfather's ashes in a container at my aunt's house. In the second encounter, the room I was in had 2 Santo Nino dolls that looked a lot like Santo Nino de Atocha and Divine Nino. What does all of this mean? One day, in the March of the current year, I was having a pretty common day in school up until I was supposed to have PE. My school is situated in a building that in the past was a shop. Inside, there are 2 staircases, one leading to the upper level of the school, where the teacher's room and most of the classrooms are, and one leading into the basement, where there is the gym, PE teacher's room, one classroom, the dressing room, and a room with tables for table tennis, and another entry into the upper level upstairs. On that day, I was standing near the staircase leading to the basement, and I saw one of the PE teachers talking with a group of other students about activities that they were going to do today. Since my school currently has 3 PE teachers, it's nothing out of the ordinary to see one of them somewhere in the building. This was unusual because the activities he was mentioning were the same ones we did, and by this I mean me and my class, a week or so prior. I shrugged it off with the thought that maybe the group he was talking to did not do them before. To give you a few details about the PE teacher I'm talking about, let's call him L. He wears a pair of blue shoes, blue sports pants, and a sports sweatshirt in the same color. The second thing, not so much out of the normal at the first glance, is the fact that after the conversation I saw L as he was going upstairs, and so I waited for him to return. The bell rang, but he wasn't coming back, so I kept waiting for him. After maybe 15 minutes, a cleaning lady came up to me and asked for whom I was waiting. I told her I'm waiting for L to return, since I saw him coming upstairs, and he didn't come back. The deputy principal overheard the whole conversation and said to me that they were going to look out for him there. Another few minutes pass, and they come back. What the deputy principal said was the most strange thing I had heard that day. She said that L isn't upstairs and that they can't find him. After a short conversation and some good advice, later I came down to the gym to look for him there, and he was there with the rest of my class. After a short while, the deputy principal comes in and tells L that I was waiting for him upstairs and that I saw him coming into the upper level. He nodded, but the thing is, he claims that he was in the gym the whole time. I know that I saw him, or something looking exactly like him, coming into the upper level of the school that day, and it never came back. Please help me explain this, or debunk what I witnessed that day. I was 11 years old and in 6th grade when this happened. So, in my school, we used to water some plants around our building every afternoon before going home. We had to get those 1-liter containers. We had to go to the garden in the grade 5 building, to the water pump. we have to individually go back and forth 3 to 5 times before having tasks done. As me and my classmates were lined up, I told my friend I'll get more containers, just so we can finish up faster. I went back into our building, and as I was picking up containers, I saw my friend come also. We were the only ones there, so I asked her if she wanted to get containers too, but she was just silent. She just continued to walk up the stairs and into our classroom. I tried to follow her up, but stopped in the middle of the stairs. Since I remembered, I had to do some watering. When I came back to the garden, I was surprised to see my friend, the same one I just saw in our building. So I said, "Hey, you got here really fast." Her face just had this confused look. She replied to me that she never went out of the line. I told her what happened, but she just laughed. I didn't really press the topic anymore since I don't like being pushy. To this day, I'm still wondering what could have happened to me if I followed that doppelganger into our classroom. This happened when I was 24. It was a truly frightening experience. I'm a female, and back in those days, I was working in an office. I was living alone in an apartment block. All I used to do was go to work and then go home. Life moved in a monotonous circle. One day, as I was passing by the front of the local train station, a man called out to me. He was wearing a suit, a real ladies' man. It broke up the routine of my mundane life. It was refreshing to be hit on. Since I had nothing better to do that day, I decided to accept his invitation to go out for a drink. But I reminded him that it would be just a drink and nothing more. He was a little older than me. I'd say about 3 years or so. We got on like a house on fire. So after a few dates, he offered me a relationship, and we became a couple. He was very witty and really fun to be around. It was about 2 months into our relationship, and it was the first time I invited him over to spend the night. I bought some alcohol and some snacks since it was Friday, and I was eagerly awaiting his arrival. We set a time for him to come over, and that time had passed. He hadn't texted to say he was running late or anything. Strange. 1 hour passed, then another, and before long it was night. I looked out the window into the night sky, wondering what had happened. An abrupt knocking came at the door. It was loud enough to make me jump. I wondered if this could be a courier or something at the door. I remembered that I hadn't ordered anything though. Rarely people come to the door without being buzzed into the building. It was weird. I guessed it must be my extremely late boyfriend, so I headed to the door.
Can I come in?
It was his voice, but something told me not to open the door. How did he get to my door without being buzzed in? I really can't say why, but I really didn't want to open that door.
Can I come in? Can I come in?
He asked the same question despite the fact that I didn't respond.
Can I come in? Can I come in? Can I come in? Can I come in? Can I come in?
I didn't reply to him, yet he continued to ask to come in. It was his voice, but it sounded like it was a recording of his voice, and it sounded like it was being played repeatedly. I hated it. I covered my ears. It was so creepy. I couldn't tell you how long it went on for. All I remember is when the voice finally stopped. I didn't know what to think. I was in a panic, so I called my boyfriend again and again, but he wouldn't answer. He never returned my calls, and I never saw or heard from him again. I didn't know his address. I couldn't contact him in any way. I didn't know where he worked or anything about his family. I realized I knew barely a thing about the man, and that freaked me out a bit. I often wonder about what happened to him and where he is today. I sometimes wonder if he was even human. It feels like it was just a glitch in the Matrix sometimes. One thing for certain is, I'm really glad I listened to my gut and didn't let him in to my apartment. I I've been thinking about it a lot lately. I call it the mimic. When I was 17, for almost a year, almost every time my mum and sister were out of town for the day shopping, and I was home alone, I'd hear it. Keys jingling in the front door, the click of the lock, the scrape of the door sliding open and closed as the dogs rushed to the front door, barking to greet whoever just came home. I'd hear my mum or sister tell the dogs to stop and that they live here, and the dogs would stop barking and go about their business. I would get up and go to say hi and go to help put things away, and nobody would be there. It stopped happening once I started staying in bed and calling my mum to see where they were, instead of getting up to greet them. Once, after my mum had surgery, she was staying at her parents' place for a few weeks to heal. I brought my dog for a walk, and when I came home, my mum's dog, who was asleep in her room, started barking. I heard my mum tell her, "Shelby, stop barking." And after a few more barks, she listened and stopped. I ran to my mum's room to say hello. I hadn't seen her in a few weeks at that point, and didn't know she was coming home, but her room was empty. I still don't know what it was or why the dogs listened to the disembodied voice. I don't know why it was stealing my family's voices. A lot of other things happened at that apartment, from knocking in the walls to claws scraping down my closet door. In the same apartment, my sister had just left to her boyfriend's, and my mum was at work. I started feeling sick one day. I grabbed a banana and went to my room to try and feel better. Almost as soon as I got on the bed, I heard a knocking coming from inside the walls. I could replicate it exactly by knocking my knuckle against the wall. I called my sister crying because I didn't know what it was, and she came home. But just before the front door opened, the knocking stopped. She made sure I was alright and then left again, and everything was quiet. I stood up to go throw away my banana peel, and as I was walking past my closet and out of my bedroom, I heard one final knock in the walls. A few months later, I rearranged my bedroom and set up a little reading corner where I was leaning against my closet in a little blanket nest I made on the floor. It only happened when I was leaning against the door for over 20 minutes, but anytime I would be reading in my little nest, I would hear and feel the vibrations of the door rumbling against my back. What sounded like claws dragging down the inside of the closet door, trying to get out. It only happened 3 times before I rearranged my room again. This time, I put my bed against the closet door so anything in there couldn't get out. Mind you, my closet was completely full to the top. A kitten couldn't fit in there. So I don't know where the sound was coming from, but it certainly wasn't in the 3 garbage bags pressing against the door. I still heard things coming from my closet after moving my bed against it, but I felt safer knowing it couldn't get out. I still don't know what was in that apartment, but I'm glad it didn't follow me when I left. I am a security guard, and this happened about half a year ago. Something or someone turned up during my shift, and I can't really explain it. Like I said, I'm a security guard. I don't work supermarkets, factories, or events. I patrol a number of contracted properties, so more often than not, I am patrolling a school, elementary schools and high schools mainly. The shift usually starts at either 9 or 10 p.m, because occasionally some of the students have events or teachers working late. Things like that. It's never great if staff are on site. Well, I don't think so. I prefer the solitude. You might imagine that I'm walking around the school grounds as my patrol, but my company doesn't ask that of me. I'm not sure what other companies are like. My job is patrolling inside the school. This would involve going around and making sure all the valuables like the computers and gym equipment are all locked away and no windows or any other access points are left open. I would usually go outside at some point, but most of the night is indoors, which isn't too bad on a rainy night. One bad thing about school buildings is that they are often long and shaped like a capital letter H. It takes a little bit of time to do a full lap of them. Anyway, now that I've set up the scene somewhat, let's get back to the story. This someone or something that turned up on my shift wasn't following me around. It was outside of the school grounds. In short, it was going along behind the fences and walls around the school. At first, I thought that it was for sure a human's footsteps I was hearing. But then things got strange. The school's fences and walls are all uneven. It was a weird school. They even had stairs on the outside of the buildings. It would take about an hour to go around the school from outside the walls. So when I went outside, I heard these footsteps following me. Every step I took was mirrored by this unseen person or thing. There were times when they should have gone faster or slower since they were behind the wall. But they didn't. They just copied me. I mean, these footsteps weren't causing me harm, but they were kind of freaking me out. I can't really complain or do anything about it because whatever was beyond those walls and fences didn't show much interest in coming in here. Besides, if there is someone out there at night copying my movements, do I really want to tick them off? I would rather at least be able to hear where they are rather than not. It happens a lot recently, every time I work at that school to be honest, and I've begun to understand that there is a kind of pattern to those movements that only seem to come when I am on shift. I've asked the other employees at my company, and they haven't heard any footsteps. The footsteps can only be heard from 11 PM onwards, when the school's outer lights go off. These floodlights are set on a timer, and they shut off at exactly 11 PM. The footsteps never come on nights when it rains. I've shone my light at the fence where I heard the footsteps a couple of times, and when I do that, I hear a huge thud crash against the fence. And then the footsteps just resume mimicking me. Like I said, I can't do much about a person outside of the school grounds walking around. As long as they stay out, it's not my problem. My worry is that one day something's going to happen. The school faces the woods on most sides, so there are many places for the owner of those footsteps to come from and run to. I get freaked out when the school gate is open and I have to go and close it. I wonder if something is going to come out of the dark charging towards me and what it might look like. I think it's human though, which makes this much more unpleasant. I wish I had an ending for you, but I don't. It just ends with me hoping the footsteps will stop one day, or at least continue to stay away from the school. This story happened at one of my more recent job places. Sit tight, this one still gives me the chills. I worked at a boarding facility for dogs and cats. From day one, stuff was off. The first thing I noticed, weird, was hearing a voice right behind me, and when I turned around, seeing no one there. Understandable enough, with 20 to 70 dogs barking all around me for their lunch or playtime or potty breaks. I kept disregarding these things until one day, from the top of a low kennel, a partially filled water container like the ones you use to water plants with and we used to fill water bowls, flew at me. No way a dog could have hit it and sent it somehow flying horizontally at me. It missed me by an inch or so. I felt the breeze of it flying past me as I walked by, and it hit the kennel across from where I was located, hard. I knew something was up there, but still hadn't paid it much mind. Shortly after, I noticed the metal doggy doors that led from each kennel to an outside run would start swinging when I entered the kennel to clean, or for anything really. I would look at the doggy doors on both other sides. No motion from them. If I stepped out of the kennel, the door would stop swinging. One day, a co-worker got mad at me and called me. She said she saw me through the window and asked why I didn't go back and talk with her for a bit. I answered with the fact that I wasn't, nor had I been anywhere near work that day. She thought I was kidding, went to the front desk to ask, and was told that no one, in fact, had been through at all in the past couple of hours. This happened 3 times with different co-workers, where they all would see me from another room or yard. and ask why I never stopped to talk on days I wasn't at work. This eventually progressed. I was moved up to being the bather for our location, so a lot of dog baths and loud dries going for the pups. And I kept seeing every time I was bathing a dog, my manager and then friend, and also the person whose voice I heard the most when no one was near me, standing by my side. She would stand there waiting for me to turn around and turn off the dryer so I could hear her. And once I did and turned towards her, no one was there. She would be busy with clients, or not even in the building. At this point, some of us girls had already been discussing the weird stuff going on. One friend and I said, roughly at the same time, "Oh, the mimic? Imitator?" We looked at each other and smiled nervously. We had never talked in depth about this stuff because, come on, how many people would even take us seriously? It turns out 2 other girls had heard or seen me or my manager more than once when we weren't there, or it wasn't us. 2 more things stuck in my memory about this place. 1, we had a storm which led to power flickering on and off. From reception to the back kennel area, where most of the activity seemed to happen, was visible through a large window so clients could see where their fur babies would be kept. As the lights flickered, 3 of us stood in reception, past our shift in case we had an emergency. 2 of us were facing that window. Both of us, at the same time, saw a fast, non-identifiable shadow thing rush past the window, even higher than the top of the kennel doors, which, by the way, are 6 feet tall. We saw this twice during the light flickers. The second thing that struck was this. We had radios. We just often forgot to use them or even turn them on. One of my co-workers was outside with the daycare dogs. Dogs there just to play for the day. When her radio clicked, a voice she did not recognize said, "Spot's mum is here for pickup," and cut out. She went to answer, only to realize her radio wasn't on. She got that dog ready and took him to the front, where the receptionist said she didn't call for him. She didn't have any radios on either. We still don't know what it is or was we experienced, but we do know it was out of the ordinary. When I was in the first year of high school, I used to love going fishing. I was really into mountain stream fishing. I would always try to catch iwana. It's a kind of rockfish out here in Japan. This type of fish is very sensitive. If it gets the slightest indication that there are humans around, it will dart off. This means that fishing for this rockfish must strictly be a solo venture. If I saw another angler nearby, I would always find another body of water to fish in. I was serious about my hobby. The fishing spots I used were about 20 minutes off the normal footpath in the woods. Well, more like the mountainous woods. So after school on the day before I intended to fish, I would always head up there. I would wrap thread around the trees, over bushes, across boulders, any place anyone could gain entrance to the streams. I would do this to know where the quiet fishing spots were. The thread was incredibly thin, barely visible, and it would always break on impact. I was certain that no one would get hurt. So the next day I rode my bike into the woods. I went around checking all the thread I had set up and smiled when I found an area which didn't have a break in the thread. I broke the thread myself and squeezed and ducked my way through all the forest obstacles and headed down to the stream. I started fishing almost immediately. There was a problem though. I could hear voices upstream. Someone was making a hell of a noise up there. Seemed weird because of the effort I had to go to get down here. We were deep in the forest. The trees were thicker and there were boulders everywhere. It didn't seem like a place people would come to play. The thread wasn't broken either. They must have been crazy to be playing out there. They were getting to me. I really wanted peace and quiet to catch this goddamn rockfish. They were ruining it. At points, it sounded like their laughter and screams were all around me. After a while, it sounded like their voices were headed further away, and I thought that I might still get a chance to do some fishing. I wanted to get on with it. The sun was beginning to set. Just as soon as I resumed, a bunch of dead leaves started flowing down the stream, enough to literally cover the whole surface, rendering fishing impossible. "What are you doing, you idiots?" I thought. I was really angry. They scared away any fish that might have come back. I felt for certain that these people were messing with me and laughing at me. I couldn't see them though. I suspected it was a bunch of guys, so I held off shouting what I was thinking. Who knows how many of them could have been out here? It's never a good idea to tick off a bunch of unseen people in the woods either, right? But to satisfy my own curiosity and find out what these people looked like and what the hell they were doing, I decided to creep up the river towards where I heard all the noise. At points, it sounded like my friends from school, and I couldn't believe that they would be out here doing this to me. Well, maybe as a prank, I suppose. I can't be sure, but I thought I heard my name at one point too. I climbed up a very narrow rocky path littered with trees and bushes alongside the stream. The trees totally surrounded me on either side. I felt like I was on a jungle expedition, like in the movies or something. As I grew closer, amidst the sounds of the voices, which still sounded like my friends, was a lone, strong female voice. Then the male voices faded away, like they weren't even there in the first place. Like it had changed. It was strange to think of a woman now, alone in here. To get to wherever she was, you would probably have to walk in the river at points. I could do this easily as I was wearing my fishing gear. Stranger still, why did she come all the way out to the woods just to act so creepily? When I thought about it, all the noises suddenly stopped. To be suddenly plunged into silence after all that was very jolting. I was getting scared now. I said to myself, enough, let's get out of here. I turned around and started moving quickly back the way I came. I started to hear something splashing behind me. I quickly realized that it was heading right towards me. I was terrified. I broke into a full-on sprint, weaving in and out of the trees and boulders. I got back to my fishing gear and ran straight past it, almost tripping on my tackle box. I ran back to the main path where I had set up the thread. As soon as I had a path out of there, I looked back despite my fear. I wanted to see what had been chasing me. I saw a horrible, dark shadow between the trees, hunched and facing my direction. I swear, it was looking at me, but I couldn't make out where its eyes were. I froze in my tracks. I was so frightened, I just couldn't move. It then moved its elongated body back down towards the stream. I never set foot in those woods again. I didn't even go back for my fishing equipment. It was a real shame to lose it all, especially since I was young, but I just couldn't face going back there. I literally have no clue what that thing was. I'm all ears to any suggestions. Was it a ghost? Maybe some kind of cryptid? How did it mimic all those voices? I think about it all the time. It's the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. This happened when I started living alone. Not long after I just moved in, I think it must have been the first week, I found out that my new apartment was in the path of an oncoming typhoon. That night I had gotten off to sleep alright, but I awoke in the middle of the night to hear the sound of the wind and rain lashing my windows. It was so loud, I just couldn't get back to sleep. I was lying there in bed, thinking about nothing in particular when I heard. It was coming from the front door. It was the doorbell. Who the hell would be ringing the doorbell of my new apartment? I asked myself. I crept downstairs and took a look through the peephole. There was a person out there. I was freaked out, but I asked, "Who is it?" I heard the fear in my voice.
Hey, it's me, man.
It was my friend, literally my best friend. He was one of the only ones who knew my address. "Why didn't you just tell me you were coming, man? It's like the middle of the night," I said through the door. I tried to get a look at him, but it was dark, and he had his hat pulled down. That didn't matter since we were friends. I mean, it was a little weird, but I've known him for years. Hey, you did really well to get here in this storm, dude. I called out as I started to unlock the door. That was the moment that something dawned on me. Best friend or not, why is he out here, barely talking, and how did he make it here? I could still hear the ferocity of the typhoon against the front door. Another odd thing, he didn't have a driver's license. Even if he somehow caught a bus, he would have had to walk for a long while. I didn't know the area all that well, but it seemed a bit too late for buses. Besides, who turns up in the middle of the night during a typhoon, unannounced? These all were red flags, and I didn't like it. What the hell was this? I brought my eye closer to the peephole. Hey bud, how did you get here? I asked cautiously. We fell into an awkward silence, while the typhoon raged on. I brought my eye closer to the peephole. I wanted to catch a closer look at him. His skin was disturbingly pale. It reminded me of a waxwork skin. His eyes flitted back and forth, as if they were remote controlled. That wasn't my friend. I wasn't even sure that was a human. It was pretending, whatever it was. I didn't let on that I was scared, but I was petrified. I watched that thing out there, which looked like my best friend, stand there and smile inanely, occasionally twitching at the corners of its lips. I had to get away from the door once I saw that. I went into another room and tried my best to compose myself and tried to think about what to do next. All the while that friend thing repeated the same line it delivered earlier, as if it was all it knew, like an actor practicing lines.
Hey man, it's me. Hey man, it's me. Hey man, it's me.
I called my friend, the one it was impersonating. He said it wasn't him. I knew it wasn't him, but I just had to be 100% sure. That thing was very convincing. I went upstairs and went back to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I didn't know how long the thing stayed outside my door, but I heard it occasionally, repeating its line.
Hey man, it's me.
After a sleepless night, the sun rose and the typhoon subsided. It took a while for me to get the confidence to approach the peephole, but when I did, I found that it was gone. Today my wife and I were out of the house most of the day. When we got home, our dog wasn't around his usual spot, the couch, and didn't run up to us. This scares us a bit because he's old and slowing down. My wife went into the basement to look for him, and he was laying in a balled up towel in the dark, which is something he has never done before. He hasn't been acting sick, and once we went down to get him, he's been fine. After putting some groceries down, I went to take the trash out, which requires walking through our 2-car garage, and then through our attached single-car garage I use as a gym. I turned all the lights on so I didn't trip, as I always do, and took the trash out of the side door in the small garage. When I turned around to come back, I saw what I thought was my wife walking past the single window, looking into the little garage. Same shirt, same size, appeared to be her, but she was kind of hunched and looking down, walking towards the closed garage door. I didn't think anything of it, and opened the door and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" before realizing she wasn't there. I checked the entire garage and nobody was. There was no way to get in without going through the door I came in, the closed garage doors, or going into the house. When I got inside, my wife was in the opposite side of the house and had not gone outside. We were both spooked a bit. Even though we are honestly not paranormal believers, we just find it interesting, like mythology. We have been in this house for about 2 years and haven't noticed anything strange before. Update. I came home today and the dog was curled up downstairs in the dark basement again. Nothing else strange though. Just 3 days ago, me and my friend went up to Walmart. There's this pavement trail up by my neighborhood basketball court, and all of a sudden 3 people almost practically materialized in front of us. We thought nothing of it at first, as the trail is commonly taken. However, upon closer inspection, the people looked just like our 3 friends, down to an exact point. Normally, I would have no problem with this. However, one of the friends had gone to Georgia, and the others were at their house. Around this point, we got creeped out, but oh well, might as well keep going. We get about halfway up the trail, and one of our friends' voices calls out. The voice being exact in cadence, tone, you name it. This is where things got weirder. Me and my friend both turned to each other and asked if that really was our friend. From there, we braced ourselves for a silly jump scare and turned the corner of the trail, and they were gone. We kept going and saw them again, this time in a home goods parking lot on the way there. We were able to get a good look at them as we were far enough away to not be detected, but close enough to get details. I saw one of them, our younger friend of the group, was standing at an angle. I checked his face for identifiable features, but there was no face. I mean, like, there was no features whatsoever on his face. It mortified me. The others turned around a little bit at the same angle as they were preparing to get to the next part of the trail that led directly to Walmart. Their faces were all contorted. I mean, like physically impossible kind of contorted. Then I realized they were following a particular pathway we followed about a month ago. I mean, down to foot placement, people placement, everything. They rounded the corner and we followed not far behind. They were gone. Entirely gone. I mean, no trace, nothing. Like they didn't exist. I brought this up with one of the friends we supposedly encountered, and she freaked out. She was more freaked out by the fact that them taking the trail meant that they were nearby than anything else. It's sort of become a taboo topic, but I think they've followed me home. Just today I was taking out the garbage, and down through this alleyway, there was a voice speaking to me. It was that same friend's voice, but ever so noticeably, yet slightly distorted. I turned, and there was 3 figures, shrouded in shadow. Their outlines were the same as those very friends I had encountered. Needless to say, I finished taking out the trash at lightning speed. I don't really see this as anything extreme right now. I'm more just looking for closure on what happened. I don't need anything immediately right now. If anyone has an answer, and I know someone does, please let me know. This was several years ago. Statistically, at any given point, there are 2 to 3 people that look exactly like me and you. I don't know if my story will be classified as paranormal, but it happened, and it was pretty weird. So I'll just tell it as it happened. Back in 2014, when I was younger and moles were still a thing, I found myself at the mall. It was the middle of the day. I was in Macy's with my then girlfriend, nothing unusual at the time. We were on the 3rd floor and just got on the escalator going down. A part that I always remember about this specific flight of escalators were the walls. They were completely mirrored and provided an almost funhouse effect when you were riding the escalators. Keep in mind, the next to the escalator we were riding is another one, this one going up to the 3rd floor, where I was leaving. Riding the escalator down and near my girlfriend, I was enjoying the infinite reflections within the mirrors dancing all around me. In the mirror, I found what I believed to be my own reflection, only I felt this reflected image of mine was somehow not me. Keep in mind the escalators going down. Trying to find a source of my not quite me reflection, I naturally look downward. Coming towards me, I see someone who looks exactly like me. His eyes are looking straight ahead, so he didn't see me yet. I stood in amazement as I rode down and he was riding up towards me. He was with a girl that also looked similar to mine. Time slowed down as I made a mental image of what I was seeing. I knew I was meeting my doppelganger, and that this must be an important moment. I should probably pay attention because I wanted to remember every possible detail. The face, the nose, the hair and hairstyle were as the same as me. He had my physical build too. He looked exactly the same height, weight, skin tone and muscle tone as me. What really blew my mind was his clothing. I believe my jaw dropped. I've been told by my friends that I have a very specific style, although I've never really understood what that meant. It's probably because I'm a retired skater punk rock type of guy and don't really follow pop trends and shit. Anyway, the point is my doppelganger was wearing clothes I actually owned and wore at the time. When I made this connection, I was overwhelmed with every kind of emotion all at once. He was coming towards me and I was going towards him. As our motorized stairs carried us further, he noticed me. We made eye contact. When he saw me, his jaw dropped. We drew closer. Our eyes locked when we passed by each other, like two ships in the night. I wasn't scared because his reaction was completely genuine, and he had the same stupid look of bewilderment I wore. We didn't say a word, but I could tell he was pretty surprised to see me. At least my doppelganger seemed pretty chill and not threatening. We turned our heads as far as we could and then got off on our respective floors. Immediately after I got off, I said to my girlfriend, "Did you see that guy?" Her face was white, and she said she didn't want to talk about it. I went to a store in my neighborhood on November the 2nd, 2021, and I bumped into a person who was coming out of the store just as I was heading in. I guess we were both rushing and walking in the same path as one another. We collided in the store's automatic doors. The person who collided into me was literally my exact double. Her face was so similar to mine that, had you passed us on the street, then you would have thought of us as twins. There was something slightly different about her face that made us different enough to not be considered identical. She had her hair tied in a ponytail. It was long and brown. I remember exactly what she was wearing. She was wearing a jacket, had a Chanel handbag, Fuji Rock t-shirt, and was wearing a Louis Vuitton heart pendant. It's weird that I remember all this, right? Well, I own all those items, so it was like I was looking at someone wearing my clothes who also looked almost exactly like me. When I bumped into her, I thought I had collided with my reflection in the automatic doors, since I bumped into her with the same momentum she bumped into me with. After we bumped into each other, we had a short conversation. The other person said, "Whoa, you look just like me, don't you?" I felt really creeped out by the way she said that. What I considered a light-hearted odd incident had now turned into something slightly frightening. I didn't even want to go into the store after that. My lookalike stood up and began to walk away. I saw that even the scrunchie she was wearing was the exact color of the one I own. This scrunchie was handmade by a friend of mine who owns a local clothes store, so there is no reason why another person would have the same one as me. It was a gift. When I saw that, I just ran home. But I was somehow scared that she was in the house or had access to the house. I guess I sound totally crazy, so I don't want to go to the cops. I didn't know what else to do, so I just came here and posted this. Sorry my writing is a bit all over the place. I'm still shaken up by this. Any suggestions? Until I was 18, I lived in the Ivory Coast in West Africa, before I moved to France. With my family, we lived in a small residence with only 8 houses reserved for executives of the company of my father. The setting was beautiful, with a pool and a tennis court. But we had experienced so many paranormal encounters while we lived there, and our neighbors as well, that eventually it became sinister to me. It seemed that all the houses in the neighborhood were haunted. When my parents moved, I thanked God, because I didn't like the house or the neighborhood anymore. Well, getting back to the story. Our house was a single story with a large terrace and a walled garden. We had a large mango tree in the garden. One day, when I was 17 years old in 1998, my mother asked me to go shopping to buy some eggs, bread, and other stuff. At the time, my youngest brother, 10 years old, was ill. He had malaria. He was very weak and remained in bed or in the living room to watch TV most of the time. I'll call him Gene for the sake of the story. So I was coming back from shopping for my mother, and on the way, it was midday, while I was walking into the small alley where we had our house. I saw my little brother Gene playing in front of the gate of the house, 20 meters away from me. He was squatting down and playing with whatever. When I saw him, knowing he was sick and should have been in bed, I yelled at him, "What are you doing here?" He raised his head to look at me, and then he went hastily into the courtyard of the house. I came to my turn into the yard, and there I saw him in the garden still playing. Again I told him, but this time he was about 3 to 4 meters away. "But what are you doing here? You're sick. You should not be outside." He stared at me, did not respond, but started to smile. I will never forget that smile. A strange smile, as if smirking. It wasn't the smile of a little boy of 10. Something in me said this is odd, but I didn't pay attention to this feeling at the time. He then ran to hide behind the big mango tree of the garden, 10 meters away, and he stuck his head out, still looking at me with this damn smirk. From there I started to get mad. Not only did he not respond to me, nor listen to me, but I also felt he was laughing at me. I started screaming loudly his name. "Gene, get out of there!" I was there screaming his name when suddenly I heard the voice of my little brother coming from my right side, who said, "Yes, I'm here." So I turned towards the right and saw Gene, with my cousins all sitting in the living room watching TV. It was him, because he had the head of a weakened patient that he had for several days. I was so surprised that my mouth remained open. I looked to my left, to the mango tree, and still saw the other Gene, hidden behind the mango tree, sticking out his head and looking at me with what was clearly a smirk. It lasted 30 seconds. I turned my head right and then left to be sure I was not dreaming. On one hand, my true brother. On the other, his double. He was clearly my brother, even wearing one of his favorite outfits. Wanting to make things clear, I jumped right on the mango tree, and there was no one there. He was gone. I was scared, but at the same time, super excited. I told all my family what happened. They believed me, but were not impressed because we were in Africa, and many paranormal events occur every day, so it wasn't a big deal for them. This summer I saw my brother's doppelganger. My brother's a tall and lanky kind of guy, a bit on the bony side too. His frame is pretty easily recognizable in a crowd. Another odd thing about him is he walks very purposefully, as if he is late for something. I saw my brother's doppelganger 3 times this summer. We live in the countryside and there is just one train station nearby. Since our town is really small, you come to recognize people who use that station and the faces you see in the town, the grocery store, the bank, etc. The town's so small that if someone's friend or family members were visiting, you could spot them almost instantly. On the train, I would say there are about 30 average daily commuters who use that station, so if someone looked exactly like a brother, then you'd notice them immediately. So one day last summer, I went to see some friends and had a great time. I took the train back just like always. I got off one of the back carriages and saw someone tall walking quickly up ahead. "Ah, it's my bro," I thought. I was going to try and catch him up and speak with him, but he was moving too fast, as usual. I couldn't be bothered to run after him since I was pretty tired. When I got home, I told him that I saw him at the train station. "What are you talking about? I haven't left the house today," he replied. "We were literally on the same train, bro." "It wasn't me," he said. I didn't know who else it could have been. I swear that I saw him coming off that train. Anyways, that was my first encounter with my brother's doppelganger. By the time the morning rolled around, I had forgotten about the whole thing. A week or so passed, and I was coming back into town around lunchtime, and I saw my brother getting off the train again, This time he wasn't too far away, so I ran over to him to chat. "Ha, same train, huh?" I said as I slapped him on the back and looked up at him. As soon as I slapped him on the back, I felt an intense feeling of unease. Just like a needle skipping on a record, something so instantly noticeable as out of place occurred. My discomfort turned into absolute conviction when our eyes met. Even though it looked 100% like him, I knew that it wasn't my brother. I apologized and scampered off in the direction of home. This is where things get weird and harder to explain. I can't clearly remember his face. This sounds so mad because he looks just like my brother, right? It's like there is a corrupted file in my memory. When I got home, my brother was there, and when I looked at him and spoke with him, I didn't get the same uneasy feeling. I saw him again, the doppelganger, not my brother, at the station, again very soon after. I didn't approach him this time, but I knew it was him. I was scared to approach him. It's crazy, it looked just like my brother, yet I was scared of it. I actually stopped and let the doppelganger walk off. I didn't want it in my eyeline. I felt really weird about the whole thing, so I spoke to my dad about it, and to my surprise, he said that he had seen the doppelganger too. He said that he saw it leaving the station too. During that summer, I felt as if I was in some kind of never-ending loop. My dad saw it one more time after this, and he said that instead of walking into town, it was heading towards the woods. After that, we never saw it again. It really makes you think, is there someone out there who looks just like you but is so inherently not you that it is noticeable to others? I find this very disturbing. I think the reason why this troubles me so much was the fact that it was in our neighborhood for such a brief time and it seemingly didn't create any issues here. But it must have been here for a reason, right? It torments me that I didn't do more when I saw my brother's doppelganger. Nothing's happened yet, but it feels like a storm's brewing. So when I was a kid, my brother and I had this babysitter named Lydia. Lydia molested me on a few occasions, but since she made it seem like a playful kind of thing, I never thought it was bad, and didn't have any issues with her until I realized what had happened when I was much older. Anyways, I was maybe 12 years old, skateboarding around my hometown when I saw a bus slowly drive by. This is important because when she worked for us, she would always take the bus home. She lived in downtown LA, and I lived about an hour plus away, in Palos Verdes, California, so there was really no reason for her to be in PV. She hadn't worked for us in maybe 5 years. So I see her sitting in the back of the bus, wearing the exact clothes that she was wearing in many of my childhood pictures with her. It was her, but it wasn't her at the same time. Something was off about her. Her skin looked different, and she had these black, beady eyes. She glanced at me for a few seconds, even though I was about 50 or so yards away, and she had this insidious smirk on her face. I remember it very clear to this day. I felt a very evil energy about it all. Semi-related, but she had also given us this cloth doll that would randomly move around and sometimes fall off the armoire it was on. It was the 7th month in 2011, and as most of us call it, the Hungry Ghost Festival. It is during this time when many weird things might happen to the unwary and many refrain from going out at night. But in my story, staying at home did not prevent one of the freakiest things in my life to occur. I was only 15 then, and all middle school students, like myself, would be tired when we get home. It was a usual day, and the smell of incense in the air was really strong that day, considering the offerings being burnt. After a cold shower, I went to my nicely air-conditioned room and took a nice long nap. At around 6:45, I heard knocking and saw my father coming into my room. He told me that he was home and if I was hungry, we could grab some dinner at the coffee shop near my HDB. He then left me to continue sleeping. At roughly 7:30, 45 minutes after my father came in, he came in again, and once again to tell me he just got home. I found it rather odd and asked him why did he come in again. He looked at me with a shocked and surprised face and asked me what I meant. I told him that this was his second time in my room, and he denied ever entering my room and that he just got back from work. We then checked the surveillance recordings of my room to see if an intruder could have come in or left between the time when we left our flat till the time we got back. But the only people leaving were my parents and myself. No one else intruded or left our flat. I was completely freaked out by this incident, and I did not know what it meant or why it happened. I guess one of the free spirits probably mistook me for his son and was so lonely that he actually asked me to have a meal with him. So I, male, 30s, haven't had a paranormal experience of any kind until this past weekend. I was staying in the guest room of my father's house, which has quilts from each of my ancestors hanging on the walls. My father's house is new, brand new in fact. They moved in this April after the house burned down on Christmas Eve of 2019. They'd only been living in the house a couple of months before the exterior fireplace connected to the house lit the roof on fire. The house is enormous. The room I'm staying in shares the wall with the bathroom on the west and the room with a full bar to the north. That room connects with the living room / kitchen to the north, which is huge. I'd say the distance between the guest bedroom and the living room is about as long as a bus. So they're a bit of a distance away. I'm sitting in bed, passively playing Animal Crossing just after midnight, maybe 12:30, when I hear my dad talking on the phone. He's absolutely a workaholic, so for a second I didn't think much of it. But he retired a few months ago and doesn't stay up late at all anymore. The conversation sounded pretty tense and I couldn't quite hear all that was being discussed, but my dad sounded very matter-of-fact. From what little I picked up, he was aggressively trying to explain his reasoning for disliking some guy. I got closer to the door to hear better, not wanting to open it and disturb him, but the sound didn't get any louder. I decided to open the door, and when I did, the voice disappeared. I like white noise to sleep, but my dad hates it, so he keeps his house dead quiet. I walked into the living room trying to hear whatever might be going on, but it remained silent. I shook it off and decided to use the bathroom right before bed. I sat down on the toilet, phone in hand, and proceeded to drop the kids off at the pool. Then I heard my sister's voice, closer than my father's voice was, and clearer as well. My sister is very much into the paranormal and is very convinced that paranormal things are happening to her. She certainly has treated a Ouija board as a toy for many years and always desired to have a ghostly encounter, so I'm not sure if she provoked something or not. I remain skeptical, but am reevaluating those feelings now. She recently had a baby and was staying the night at Dad's because the baby was sick. I still couldn't phrase what was being said, but I could tell she was telling a story. The only clear thing I heard was, "He has killed, and he will kill again." And that was more than enough for me to pinch it off, wash my hands and run to bed as fast as I could. I put in headphones and stayed up for another hour and a half watching Animaniacs until I was tired enough to sleep. When I turned off the phone, I took out my headphones. I could hear my dad's voice again. It sounded like it came from the bed I was in, and it said,
Hey, bud.
just like my dad does. Only there was no one there. I think I encountered a mimic, though I'm not entirely sure. I'm curious what you all think. I moved to my current address just a few months ago, and as my family and I were moving in, our upstairs neighbor told us that the house is fairly active for paranormal activity. I didn't really know what to think, but I don't consider myself a skeptic or a believer. But there are truly no explanations for the things I've experienced. The first big experience I had in the house was a few days after we started moving in. We were only moving from another city over, so we decided to kind of take our time with the move. My mum and brother had taken the U-Haul back to the apartment to load up belongings while I stayed behind and started to move the boxes into rooms. I was moving boxes from the living room into the kitchen when I looked up to look out the window. I found a man in an old black suit and hat walking down the sidewalk to the backyard. He didn't look at me. He just walked straight back. I thought at first that he was possibly the property manager or owner. I opened up the back door to go and meet him, but he had disappeared. That was before the neighbor warned me. He told me that the malicious activity mostly takes place in the basement. Snarls, thrown rocks, scratches. I've only experienced knocking sounds and weird shadows. And his son's bedroom upstairs. He told me his son was dragged out of bed by the ankles. Most of what I've experienced has been in the kitchen. I often hear people walking upstairs in areas that have since been boarded up. There's a staircase that the owners boarded up and turned into a pantry. Stuff is constantly getting knocked off countertops and thrown to the floor. I was also grabbed once when sweeping the floor. I haven't really given it any attention or tried to contact or communicate because it hasn't really impacted me. A lot of it I just thought was weird and figured it's an old house. Old houses do weird things. Last night was completely different. It was around 2:30 in the morning. I was in bed, trying my best to sleep when I heard something in the living room or kitchen, making the weirdest noise I've ever heard in my life. It sounded like a man yelling, trying to mimic a cat in heat. It was not my cat, he's neutered, and was asleep by my feet. I mentioned mimicry in the title because sometimes my cat makes yowling noises when he's out in the kitchen. He really likes the way his meowing and carrying on echoes back to him. This was not that sound. It was not a cat outside. I have the windows closed and the air conditioning on. This sound was inside the house. I have no idea what could have made the noise, other than something supernatural. It scared the hell out of me, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. I'm kind of concerned. I don't know if I should truly be concerned. Is this a sign that whatever entities are in the house are getting bolder? Are they trying to target my cat? I would love to hear if you have any ideas on what it could be, or if you've experienced similar things, especially what happened after. Since around 2014, I've had periodic experiences with something that I've taken to calling the bathroom ghost. A vast number of these experiences have happened in or around the bathrooms of places I lived or stayed at for some odd reason. The first encounter, in what I think was 2014, was at a friend's house where I often spent the night. I was in my sophomore or junior year of high school at the time. I always got a lot of strange feelings in that house. The air felt heavy and wrong in a way that I couldn't quite explain or articulate. And certain rooms I just couldn't be in because they would make me feel anxious for some reason. Anyway, one of these days I was staying over. I heard something strange that scared me half to death while I was in the bathroom. To the left of me was the door. To the right was the bathtub. On my right side, I heard a voice whisper, "Hey," clear as day, not far from my ear. It made me jump out of my skin, and I recognized that it sounded exactly like my friend's voice. Now, the speed with which I convinced myself it must have somehow just been the shower curtains shifting was honestly remarkable, but just as soon as I calmed myself down, it did it again. "Hey," in that whispered tone in my friend's voice. Needless to say, I got out of that room as fast as possible. Now, I want to clarify that there was no way this could have actually been my friend. Reasons being that A, the voice came from the side of the room opposite the door, and there was no nearby room through which he could have spoken through the wall or something. Also, the voice wasn't muffled in any way. B, I could clearly hear my friend talking loudly to his mum in the living room, which was at least 30 feet from the bathroom door. Now, I only experienced this once in that house, but here's why I think that whatever this thing was, it's followed me. In my first apartment with my friends, there was one notable circumstance of something happening in the bathroom. Now, this may not have been the same thing. It wasn't a voice which mimicked one of my friends. This was at least 3 to 4 years after the first experience, but myself and my 2 roommates were all sat in the living room watching movies when we suddenly heard an odd sound from the bathroom. The hairdryer had turned itself on. It had been plugged in, so maybe it was just a spooky coincidence. But there hadn't been any sort of power surge to have triggered it, and we were all pretty spooked. The most recent experience, which truly makes me believe that this thing has followed me, happened just last year, not too long after moving into my current apartment. Once again, I was in the bathroom, and I heard a voice come from the door. Clear as day, I heard my fiance's voice say, "Hello?" Reasonably, I had assumed that they came to the door to talk to me, which we do with some frequency. So I responded back, "Hello?" I didn't get any further response, so I started to get a bit nervous. My fiance had been in the bed when I went to the bathroom, and the bedroom's just next door. But we have long since learned that we can't hear each other if one of us yells from the bed towards the bathroom, hence why we sometimes stand outside the door to talk. I got out and, a bit nervous, asked if they had been trying to speak to me through the door. They were lying down where I left them when I came into the room, and they very casually told me that no, they hadn't. Fully shaken now, I told them what I had heard, and they were a little amused, like, the bathroom ghost strikes again, which I did also find funny. They weren't making fun of me for being a little freaked out by any means. My fiancé is not the type of person who tries to scare other people by messing with them, so I know they weren't just playing a joke on me and acting like they had no idea what I meant. Does anybody know what sort of thing this might be? Is it in my head? What kind of thing copies people's voices? About a year and a half ago, I moved into an older home out in the country with a friend from college. We have bedrooms that share a wall. Ever since we had moved in, there has been strange instances. During the day, we will get weird feelings that something is watching us. We will hear footsteps in the upstairs, and things will be moved around or knocked over in the kitchen. About 6 months in of us living together, her boyfriend moved in, and I started staying over at my boyfriend's more often. At this point, I would always notice when I got home my TV was on. It's always off when I leave in the morning for work. I don't sleep with it. And a decorative box I have under my TV unit is always shoved to the back end of the shelf. My friend said she started noticing mornings I was gone that she would hear movement in my room of the closet and dresser doors opening, clothes shifting, as if I was there. It seems as though something was mimicking the sounds I would make most mornings while I was there getting ready for work. A few weeks ago, her and her boyfriend were gone for the weekend, and I had the house to myself. The house cat was also gone for the weekend. I got woken up in the middle of the night. I'm not sure what time it was, but I felt the cat jump into bed with me by my feet and started kneading the bed as he usually would. It wasn't until I reached down to pet him and find nothing was there to realize he was not even in the house. We have also seen a man in random areas of the house, usually upstairs in one of the guest rooms, or walking into the bathroom. I only caught glimpses of him, and he's always walking into a room when we catch him, and is gone when we go to investigate. Do you guys think this stuff is related to each other? Any ideas what this could be? We lived in a rural area out in Illinois. We've been told there were Native Americans that used to inhabit this property. Not sure if that gives any clues. Any comments would be helpful. Thanks in advance. I just had the weirdest experience about an hour ago. I woke up and went across a very small hall to the bathroom. I live in a piece of crap small trailer with thin walls. My brother's room connects to this tiny hall, and my mother was asleep in the living room, also off the same hall. This hallway is maybe 3 by 6. Anyway, I go to the bathroom and walk back into my room and close the door. I take 3 big steps to my bed and start to turn to sit and then recline. But all of a sudden I hear a sound like a dog, but it doesn't sound right. It sounds off, like something or someone trying to sound like a dog. I froze in terror. In fact, I don't think I've ever been this terrified in my life, aside from near-miss car accidents. Just filled with fear. It made like a long noise in 3 sets of 3. I literally only unfroze long enough to lock my bedroom door and grab a big stick I keep next to it. I tried to call my sibling twice on the phone in case it was some intruder or something. I didn't want them to run out unprotected if I called out their name loudly. But they thought my calls were their alarm and silenced them. The sound continued after the phone calls. It felt like something was still out there. I yelled my sibling's name. It woke my mum up, and my sibling finally woke up, and when they came I unlocked the door. I told them, and they did not hear anything. We have 2 dogs. It was neither of them. And when I came out, they were asleep. My sibling asked if maybe I was just hallucinating, having just woken up, and I would think that, except I have a litter of 4 8-week-old kittens in the room with me. When the noise started, 2 were near me, one a foot from the door and the other right next to my foot getting ready to attack it. They both froze too, and bowed their backs up. The one near my foot had his paw on my foot, and the only movement the poor thing managed was digging his claws into the top of my foot. These kittens typically do not stay still unless they are sleeping. Our dogs have made all kinds of barking and noises around them, and they have never really reacted, aside from maybe being briefly startled by the barking. My sibling and I look around our small double wide, and the back door was unlocked but closed. We go out on the porch and hear nothing. As we were walking back to my room, I heard the noise again, and it was very faint. 3 and like it was moving away outside. My sibling actually heard that this time, and when I heard it the first time it sounded like it was in the house, right outside my door. My mum says she didn't hear anything though. I'm so freaked out, I don't want to sleep. I have a handgun in a case next to me right now. The logical explanation is some weirdo coming into the back door and being a weirdo, but I think we would have heard them trying to get out of the house. It is cramped, and there are quite a few obstacles to slow someone down, or that would cause noise. No footsteps. The door not opening or closing, either front or back. Does anybody else have any ideas about this? Edit. My sibling and I were talking this morning trying to come up with more explanations, one of which was wind. But we have wind pretty consistently lately, and this has been the only time we've heard this so far, and the fact that it is patterned leaves me doubting the wind. I do hope it is some kind of household fluke. This happened on Sunday, 16th of January 2022. The first event happened at 8 p.m. I was in the WC of our house. We have a full bathroom and a WC, and I had a coughing fit that sounded really bad. As I'm calming down and trying to catch my breath, I hear my mum's voice coming from the full bathroom asking me if I'm okay. The bathrooms are connected with a common airway, and we usually use it to speak to one another if it's necessary. Otherwise, it's used as an airway. I say that I'm okay and get out of the WC, and I go to knock at the full bathroom's door to reassure my mum that I'm okay. But nobody was in the bathroom. My mum was in her room on her computer. Confused, I asked mum if she's been to the bathroom in the past 5 minutes, and she said she hasn't. She didn't want to lose any moment of her friend's radio program, so she was keeping her water intake to the minimum. I just shook my head and went on with my afternoon. The second event happened at 6 a.m. I was about to head to bed after spending the entire night writing. I'm more creative at night. And I decided that it was enough of writing for tonight. I went to brush my teeth and pee before bed. I'm peeing when someone knocks on the door. And then I hear my dad's voice asking me if I'm okay. I say yes, and he says, "All right," before I hear him enter the kitchen and turn on the small kitchen light. I hear him prepare the kettle for his coffee and prepare my sister's breakfast. I look at my phone and it's 6:15 a.m. I think that my dad might have woken up an hour earlier than usual because he couldn't sleep. He usually wakes up at 7 a.m. and starts waking my sister up for school. It wasn't unusual for my dad to wake up at 6 or 5 a.m. or not sleep at all at night, reading comics on his computer, waiting for 7 a.m. So I shrug it off and get on with my thing, but when I finish and I'm turning a light off, I turn to say good morning to my dad, but the kitchen is empty and dark. Dad is nowhere to be seen. I gently go to my parents' room, and I can hear my mum and my dad snores. So I go to my room to sleep. At 7 a.m. I woke up to the sound of my dad's alarm clock, and I get up to go ask my dad if he went to the kitchen around 6 a.m. And he said no, but had a dream of getting a glass of water from the kitchen. I'm still confused about these two events. Any idea what could have happened? Update. My dad told the entire family of his experience a couple of days ago, similar to mine but on a different day. It was the 27th of January 2022, and my dad woke up, startled at 3:30 a.m. because he heard my voice and my sister's voice calling him. He tells us that he woke up, but all of us were asleep when he checked. Same time, same day, 3:30 a.m. my sister woke up for no reason because she heard Dad's voice calling her in her sleep. She thought Dad was waking her up for school. Mum wakes up at 3:33 a.m. because she heard Dad's voice telling her that my sister and I needed them. But my dad isn't on the bed. He has gone to check on us. I'm dreaming, and in the dream, I'm calling for my dad because I'm looking for him. I wake up when I can't find him, and my first instinct is to look at my phone. It's 3:36 a.m. Confused, we all shared our experiences. We don't know why it's happening. Mum joked that I somehow psychically contacted Dad through my dream, and he always goes on high alert when my sister or I need something from them in the middle of the night. The thing is that I can't remember the dream I was having. I only remember the part where I was looking for my dad. And that's weird because I usually remember all my dreams. I'm pretty sure I didn't sleep talk. Hearing him share this reminded me of my experience a week prior to this, and thought to add it. When I was about 8 or 9, can't remember the exact age, I visited my relative's apartment with my mum. My father bought me a cute doll from overseas, and I wanted to show it to everyone in the household. While my mum was talking to the relatives, I decided to visit their neighbor's apartment. I knew them well and I had been to their place many times. I went to that flat, greeted some family members sitting in the living room. I then took the stairs to go to the upper floor. I remember the upper floor was dark and the only light was coming from the veranda. I saw 2 family members sitting and talking. I went to them, showed them my doll and walked back to the dark hallway to reach to the stairs that would take me back down to the first floor. That's when I saw a woman walk into the room at the back of the hallway. From the back, she looked so much like one of the women who lived in that flat. I thought of following her into the room as I wanted to show her my doll. Before I entered that room, I became very scared for some reason. Part of the reason may have been because the room was pitch black, and I was confused why she wouldn't turn on the light. I was worried she might hide in a corner trying to jump at me in the dark. So I decided not to go into the room and went downstairs, only to find that woman in the kitchen on the first floor. I didn't see her on my way in, but she had been downstairs all along. I told her what I saw upstairs and she exchanged a funny look with another family member there and just brushed me off. By the way, there were no guests in the house. I don't know who I saw. I told my mum about it later too. She also brushed it off. But I later overheard her talking to my dad about some funny things going on in that apartment. After they brought in a harp-like musical instrument, my mother said they would hear someone playing the harp at night, and when they checked, the sound would stop. I've been intrigued by mimic stories, especially because of this childhood experience. This is the one and only encounter I have with anything paranormal. From where I come from, there are beliefs and warnings about mimics. For example, hikers and hunters are told not to call each other by their real names, as mimics can lure them to make them lost by calling their names in the voice of someone they know. They could also trick you by looking like your friends and make you follow them. Do you have such beliefs in your country? If you have similar stories to share, I would like to hear them. The other night I was talking with friends and was reminded of 2 stories that happened to me involving apparent doubles of people I knew. Probably about 10 years ago, my friends and I were playing a game I made up in a large local cemetery. The game involved one team with flashlights guarding a MacGuffin object. Usually it was a dim red blinking light I had, like something you'd wear at night jogging or cycling. The other team would try to sneak past the guards and retrieve the light. Basically hide and seek meets capture the flag meets flashlight tag. We had just finished a round, and we were gathering around a large tombstone where the light was sitting when the game ended. We were calling out for the hiding team to come out. The game was over. Most of the 7 or 8 of us playing were there. We were just waiting on Dan. I was looking around and spotted him in silhouette in the near distance. The cemetery is on a hill, and the backside of it is mostly set against a steep drop-off, with one of the paths running along the edge. This night was pretty bright with moonlight and light pollution from the town, so it was pretty easy to pick him out against the sky as he walked down the path. "Oh, there's Dan," I said to the group, pointing. Right after I said that, Dan came walking up from my right. I was so taken aback at this sudden appearance, it took me a second to look back up where I saw the person walking. Obviously, the figure was now gone. This admittedly may not be a paranormal experience but a creepy encounter with a person. But here's a few reasons it may well be paranormal. I was completely sure it was Dan. When you are good friends with someone, you can recognize their gait and posture as they walk. This, combined with the figure's body type and hair, matching Dan perfectly, made me totally sure I'd spotted him. The other reason I don't think it was a person is that they would have had to walk back the way they came, clearly visible against the sky, or past us, under the cemetery office lights to get out of the cemetery, as they were walking into a back corner. It's possible they just walked off into the woods, but I doubt they could have walked down the steep, densely wooded hillside quietly. Our investigation over to that part of the cemetery, of course, didn't turn up an explanation. Now, for the second story, which I'm confident in claiming is paranormal. I worked at a Sears in my town in 2013 as a warehouse worker. One of my jobs was to stock items, clothes, tools, etc. in the main warehouse in the back, or any of the smaller stock rooms around the store in different departments. One stock room in particular always gave me and my buddies the creeps. I was never sure why. It was pretty big, more or less dividing the clothing and softlines departments from the tools and appliances. The inside of the stockroom was divided in two. One was the storage for the shoe department, with sliding ladders like a library to get to all the shelves, and you could walk through from the shoes entrance and exit out a door in appliances. The other side was sectioned off by a chain-link fence with shelving attached, and this part, for children's clothing, only had one door in and out, even though you could see through the fence to the other side. When you walked in this room, the wall was on your right, and to the left was a long line of shelves with some folded clothes and some shirts on hangers. You would have to walk nearly the full length of the room before the shelf ended and you could turn to the left and access the rest of the stockroom. I was by myself, unboxing clothes, when I heard the door open. I was next to the door, but on the other side of the shelf. I looked up and saw the top of my coworker Jake's head above the hanging shirts. Since he was one of my friends that thought this room was creepy, I tiptoed quietly next to him on the other side of the shelves as he walked down the corridor. When he was almost at the end of the shelf, I jumped forward and yelled, and there was nothing in front of me. Although I was very positive I'd seen Jake's head above the clothes as we both walked to the end of the aisle, he wasn't in the room with me. I'm getting so wigged out just remembering turning the corner to empty space. After a few seconds, the door opened, for real this time, and Jake actually walked in. He asked if I was alright because he heard me yelling to try to scare him, and now I looked pale and freaked out. I lied to my manager and said I'd finished stocking the clothes, so I didn't have to be in there the rest of my shift. I later found out from the assistant store manager, Irene, that she had once found a man who had a heart attack and died in the hallway to the restrooms. This hallway, of course, was where the door to the creepy stockroom was. When she was the manager of the shoe department, whose stockroom was adjacent to the creepy one, she came in early one morning when the store was extending its hours for the holidays. It was still dark out before they opened and she was sitting by herself, about to eat a quick breakfast. She heard one of the sliding ladders squeak, and when she turned to see who it was, 2 or 3 of the ladders were sliding back and forth, down the shelves, all on their own. Let me know what you guys think of these encounters. I just thought it was interesting. I've twice now seen figures that I was very certain were my friends, only for it to turn out to be thin air. When I was about 8 to 10 years old, I lived in a horrifying apartment complex. I will tell you one of my paranormal stories that really freaked me out. So I had just gotten to bed, and I had made sure my curtains were closed all the way because I was terrified of being able to look out of my windows while laying down. I always had a hard time of going to sleep, but that night was different. I fell asleep easily, but I woke up in the middle of the night, I think, because I couldn't check the time because of how scared I was. When I woke, I kind of squirmed around. Then I finally opened my eyes. I noticed It was really dark. Soon enough, my eyes adjusted to the dark, and that's when I noticed something. By my closet was something sitting down and staring at me. It wasn't a stranger. I know this person. It was my mum. But at the same time, it wasn't my mum. Because, for one, my mother wouldn't be in my room staring at me while I was sleeping and sitting on my bedroom floor. Also, it looked like my mum, but its eyes were off. My mum has the most vibrant, pretty blue eyes. It had eyes that were darker. Not too dark, but you could tell the difference. And it was looking at me like someone would if they're spaced out. It also had the most emotionless expression my mum would never wear on her face. It scared the crap out of me. I kind of shifted over, looking towards the window where it wasn't at, and so it couldn't see my face. I noticed my curtains were opened a bit, where I could see outside, which also scared me, so I closed my eyes trying to go back to sleep. Surprisingly, I fell asleep almost in an instant. When I woke up, no one was there. I didn't tell anyone about it till weeks later, and I told my mum during laundry when I noticed a shirt. It's the shirt that the thing was wearing. My mum kind of freaked out and told me to tell her stuff sooner. I want to start off by saying, though I have a history of mental health struggles, that I am not, nor have I ever been schizophrenic. I've never hallucinated, auditory or otherwise. In fact, all of the experiences I have had starting over 2 years ago began when I left a Christian cult and my mental health began to improve. Back when the experiences began, I lived in Mississippi, and as my kid had claimed since moving there, our house was absolutely haunted. Things moved, disembodied voices, often mimicking my voice or my then husband's, shadow people, visible orbs, and a lot of ghost cats. I thought leaving that house would be the end of my experiences. Wrong. While I have had many experiences over recent years, one stands out to me over the others, and it was witnessed by 3 other people. Right before the pandemic, my small family moved to Washington State to be with family who weren't involved in the cult. It felt like coming home, like I should have been with them all along, and generally, all around, the most positive choice I have ever made. To get on our feet, we lived with my aunt and uncle for several months until we could find work and a home of our own. My aunt and uncle actually run a pagan community and have a lot of Celtic imagery of deity figures from Ireland. To say their house had a lot of spirit activity is an understatement. I hadn't been in their door half an hour before things began to happen. Something poked my butt when no one was standing behind me, touched the shaved side of my head, and on more than one occasion, called me by name. All events with witnesses who also began to experience the same things. The most noteworthy experience I had there was the one that will stand out in my memory with crystal clarity forever. Myself, my aunt, my uncle, and my husband were all in their living room, a small room set to the side with their double wide, where we had gathered for the evening to watch some TV. The only one not present was my kid, Victory, age 11 at the time, who was in the library which doubles as their room on the other side of the house. I was sitting in an easy chair when I look up to see my kid walking by the entry to the room to head into the kitchen. They locked eyes on me, and I instantly knew something wasn't right. For context, my child is on the autism spectrum. They don't like to make eye contact, and if they have to, they de-escalate the sensations by being a total goof. They didn't wave, they didn't smile, they didn't do anything but meet my gaze stoically and continue on to the kitchen. I can't overstate the not rightness I felt. I, at first, thought something was wrong, that they were upset. Understandably, they were going through a lot with the move and being shunned by our cult family members. So I got up to go do the mum thing, calling after them and hurrying to catch up. They could have only been a step or two ahead of me. I left the room, rounded the corner to face the kitchen, more words on my lips, and no one was there. I was confused. I saw them go into the kitchen, so I called out for my kid, and their voice called back from the other side of the house, still in their room, having never left. I went back to the living room and asked the others if they had seen Victory walk by, a little unnerved. My uncle said yes, as did my aunt. Tim said they had thought they saw them walk by, but paid little mind. So unless this was some weird shared hallucination, we all saw it. I have since found out that I am sensitive to the energy spirits give off, and apparently, as it runs in the family, unknown to me till now, spiritual gifts are inherited. They call me a baby medium, so I feel confident in saying that I know whatever spirit took the form of my kid did not do so maliciously. They wanted to be noticed, and it absolutely worked. In fact, most antics from spirits seem to be this, and I have come to accept that they are around me and my family, even after moving into our new apartment. I have other stories, but this one was the big one that stands out. I was no more than 8 years old when I saw it. Even my sister, 10 years old, saw it. We lived with my grandparents at the time, but my grandpa often liked sleeping in the living room because he often wakes up at night to pray at our tiny altar. We don't always close our bedroom door. Basically, the living room was next to our bedroom, and our bedroom was next to the bathroom. So we'd see if anyone were to go to the bathroom through our bedroom. One Saturday night, me and my sister stayed up late, watching TV in the bedroom. The only light in the house was in our bedroom, and my grandpa chose to sleep in the living room again. It was past midnight, so we thought everyone in the neighborhood was asleep. That was until we saw my grandpa walking past our bedroom. We both stared at him until he disappeared from our sight. Of course, who would be scared? It's your grandpa. But for some reason we had chills because he never came back out. We assumed he needed to go to the bathroom, but we never even heard the door close. But what creeped us out was how unusually straight he walked, as if he was marching like a soldier. And a bit slow too, like he's trying to scare us. It was a bit dark, but we knew it was him because of his features. So we called out to him. The first few calls had no reply, so we raised our voice so he could hear us more. This time, he came to us. But what shocked us was that he emerged from the living room instead of the bathroom. Note that my grandpa often wears all white clothes when he's at home. It didn't hit us that our grandpa was wearing colored clothes that day, and not all white. The one that we saw a while ago was wearing a white sleeveless shirt and white shorts and was barefoot. That scared us even more. We asked our grandpa if he went to the bathroom just now. He said no, and that he was asleep. It was impossible for him to have pranked us because there was no exit through the bathroom. The windows there are all barred. We immediately told him about what we saw. He went to check but saw nothing. We were scared kids. We didn't know what doppelgangers were until then. Our grandpa talked to us about doppelgangers. He said that's probably what we saw, that it was kinda well known in our area. And he told us that if we see any more doppelgangers, like paranormal ones in the future, then we should immediately tell the original person about it. Because if we don't, then something bad will happen to them. Me and my sister never forgot about it. I would also like to share an incident that occurred a few years ago in a different part of my country. I forgot the exact details, but it was on the news and all over social media. A young couple was killed in a motorcycle accident. I believe a bus ran over them. But what triggered everyone was what the townsfolk said. They said that last night they saw the couple riding their motorcycle wearing the same clothes. But what shocked them was that they were headless. I don't know if it's real or they were just exaggerating, but the first thought everyone had was doppelgangers, and no one knew who it was because they didn't have their heads. That was until people recognized the clothes the dead people were wearing the next day, except the couple still had their heads, but their bodies were contorted in various ways that they assumed that was the bad omen the doppelgangers brought. That story reminded me of what I saw when I was a kid. A year ago, I made a post about me and my sister seeing a doppelganger of my grandfather when we were kids. Just today, something reminded me of another doppelganger incident I experienced and thought I'd share it, because it scares me to think that maybe, just maybe, it had something to do with my dad getting hospitalized. I'm not superstitious, but I just got chills thinking about the what ifs, you know? So anyways, a year or maybe the same year, I forgot. I was up late. I think it was around 1 or 3 a.m. I went downstairs to use the bathroom. While walking down the stairs, you can actually see the archway to the kitchen, and I thought I saw my dad, just standing there. I couldn't see his face because he was facing the kitchen, and when I almost approached him, maybe arm's length, he suddenly walked forward into the bathroom and closed the door. Note that the bathroom door is in the kitchen. So I didn't say anything and just waited for a while outside the bathroom for him to finish. I later found it a bit odd that he didn't turn on the light in the bathroom. You should be able to see if there's light from the large gap at the bottom of the door. No sound either. But I heard a clang in the bathroom like metal hitting something. At first I assumed it was the toilet flush handle, but I didn't hear a flush. You know that eerie silence you see in horror movies? 1 second, there's the sound of wind and crickets, and the next, there's nothing. Like the movie's telling you something's wrong. That's what I felt. There was this eerie silence after that metal clang sound, like pure, eerie silence. My breathing stopped for a bit. I was caught off guard. It wasn't a long silence, more like a few seconds. But to me, it felt like time stopped for a minute. I'm not exaggerating. I called out to my dad, but I shit you not, I was actually scared to call out, and something else might answer back. Because I swear, the ominous feeling I felt at the time was bad. I never felt that before. No response. I called a second time, and this time louder. Still no response. I went to the bathroom door, only to find it wasn't even locked. I opened it and checked, only to find out there was no one there. That's when I realized that the person who I thought was my dad, that was arm's length in front of me just a moment ago, wasn't even my dad, because my dad has the same height as I do. I was so unfocused earlier that I didn't realize how different the one I saw from my dad was. I stared blankly for a while by the bathroom and ran up to my parents' bedroom, only to find my dad and mum fast asleep on the bed. Whatever it was that I saw had a similar haircut as my dad, and it was taller and wider. I confirmed that comparison the next day when I asked my dad to stand at the archway so I could reimagine the scenario. Also, the bathroom had no windows, just an exhaust fan. So if that was an intruder, it won't make sense for him to climb through the exhaust fan because that's like stuck in the ceiling. That incident was during the pandemic, so it was fairly recent. I told my family about it in the morning, and my mum told me just a few nights ago that she woke up in the middle of the night and saw me standing in the doorway of their room. She said she was half awake, so she ignored it. Then she woke up again, but this time I was standing by the edge of the bed, facing the wall. She fell asleep again and forgot to tell me about it in the morning. She didn't think it was anything weird at first because she thought it was me. I don't remember going into their room late at night, let alone standing like a creep. When we all told each other's story, we got scared. Well, a year later, my dad was hospitalized and got his limb amputated. He's diabetic. Things got out of hand and it was just the beginning of the pandemic. He didn't get immediate treatment from the hospital. His limb was in very bad shape, so in the end they amputated it. He came back home safely despite everything that's happening, and now he's doing well both emotionally and physically. Now the reason I was mentioning this in a paranormal encounter of mine is because I remember what my grandfather told me. It's actually a thing people believed in my country. Basically, when you see a doppelganger of a person you know, you have to tell the real person about it. But that's just what my grandpa taught me. It was only when I turned into a teen that I found out from the other locals that you have to hit the real person at the back of the head, or even just flick of your finger or knuckle, enough to make it hurt for them and not just tell them about the doppelganger, or else something bad might happen to them. Again, I'm not superstitious, but sometimes when you're in a panic or paranoid about something, you try to understand and believe it. I was thinking that maybe, just maybe, the doppelganger was a sign about what was about to happen to my dad. I know it sounds ridiculous, I'm sorry. I'm just blaming myself at this point. It might be anticlimactic or boring, but I was bothered for a while. After that night, I couldn't sleep because of whatever it is that I saw. Anyways, if anyone is listening to this, thanks. Glad you made it to the end of this long story. I will try and give as much detail as possible and keep this from going on too long. This happened back in the summer of 2015 when I was serving the United States Army Reserves. I was stationed in southern Alabama in a transportation company. Sometimes my girlfriend would come with me on the drill weekends, and we would crash at a friend of hers' apartment, which is where this incident took place. This particular weekend, we were in a large convoy in the middle of nowhere on some back road out in the sticks well over 100 miles from the city. That was when I got the most confusing, bizarre, and downright creepy phone call of my young life. She was in utter hysterics. She was crying and screaming, wondering why I would frighten her so badly, what the hell my problem was, and asking me how I even pulled it off. After I was finally able to calm her down, this is the story she relayed to me. Sometime that afternoon, her friend was at work, and she was at the apartment by herself. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the door, not a knock. After looking through the peephole, she saw me. But there was something off. She says I was wearing my army uniform. It looked like me, but that I had this very angry, aggravated look on my face. She opened the door wondering why I was home so early, and apparently, without saying a word, I angrily blew past her, shoulder-checking her into the wall, and quickly walked down the hall, taking a left into the bedroom and slamming the door behind me so hard that the whole place shook. She was very alarmed and confused about why I was home so early and in such an agitated state. I mean, that is so out of character for me. I'm not a violent guy at all. On top of that, if something did happen to set me off, she would have been the first to hear about it. So she's walking behind me, trying to get some information out of me, and she opens the bedroom door behind me and sees the closet door slam shut. She proceeds to run over to see what I was doing in her friend's closet and claims that when she opened the door, it was completely empty. That was when she had a panic attack and called me. Imagine my shock and confusion hearing that story, knowing that I was well over 100 miles away at the time. She finally believed me after I sent her a photo with my current GPS location, which only served to freak her out more. I thought that there must be some kind of rational explanation for what she saw. I will be honest and say it, she did smoke a little weed here and there, but at the time I know she was sober. She did not mess around with hard drugs or drink, and she had no mental illness of any kind. Over the years since that happened, I came to learn about doppelgangers. I don't know what they mean, what they represent, or why they come around. All I know is that they are creepy as shit, and a girl I dated for several years came face to face with mine, and it put the fear of God into the poor girl. Take from this story what you will, and honestly, I don't care if anyone believes it or not. I just have to get it off my chest. The first time this happened was when he was 3. My older sister was staying in my apartment and watching TV in her room when my son walked in. She asked him if he wanted to watch cartoons and put some on for him. He just sat quietly at the end of her bed while she tried to get his attention. Then, she hears him laugh in the other room with me. When she looks to the bedroom door, the copy of my son disappeared. When she told me this, I assumed she was high and imagined it. Second time, a friend visiting from the UK got up at night to use the restroom and saw my son's door was wide open, lights on, and he was sitting at his little table with a friend. He told me about this in the morning, since it was 3 a.m. and kinda weird. My son wasn't in his room that night, and no other children were present. I rationalized it as he was tired and imagined it. The third time was when my son was around 8. My best friend and roommate, new apartment, different state, got up to go to the bathroom. The hall light was off, and it was dark, but she saw my son standing in the hall next to her. She told him to go back to bed and stepped into the bathroom. She then sees him in the mirror standing behind her and tells him to stop and to go to bed. My son then turns around and walks away. That's when she realized something was wrong and looked back into the hall, but he wasn't there. She goes to his room and he was still asleep. She ran to my room to tell me, and for the first time I thought, okay, there seems to be a pattern here. Maybe there is something going on. The last time was when my son was 15. This time I saw it. I was in bed, depressed and tired after having had a miscarriage. I woke up to my son curled up in bed next to me. I thought he was just trying to comfort me, which was sweet. I sang a lullaby to him and pet his hair before it clicked. My son was 15 now. This was him at age 7 or 8. I froze and asked who he was. He told me everything was going to be okay. Then he got up and left. Everyone assumed it was blood loss that made me hallucinate. But I was wide awake. No one's seen my son's double in 5 years, but it's weird as hell. For some context, I was visiting my grandmother on my mum's side for the weekend. My aunts and uncles are usually there as well, and we always do that on the weekend to check up on her and see how she's doing. Now, for the entire day, I had the feeling I was being watched or followed, but for the sake of not creeping anyone out, I just shrugged it off as paranoia. Around late afternoon, I went to wash my hair and was there for quite some time. Now, my mother didn't know that, so she was calling me in from the kitchen. Usually I'd be able to hear her, but after 10 minutes in there, it sounded as if the entire house had gone quiet, so I couldn't hear her at all. And my sister told her where I was, but she replied, "No, I just saw her in here. She was playing with the cats, she just passed me." When she told my sister that, she came by the door of the bathroom and told me what our mother had just said in a very confused voice. I was also confused because I'd only seen one of the cats all day and couldn't find the other one for feeding time, so I assumed he was in one of the rooms ignoring me because he did that a lot. Now, that was before I went to wash my hair, so around morning, going into the afternoon. After that, I hurried to finish up and went to the kitchen where my mother was. She looked up at me and said, "Why are you changed? You were just with the cats a few minutes ago." I shook my head and told her I'd been in the shower washing my hair, so I couldn't have been with the cats when she saw me. She simply shrugged and told me that she must have mistaken someone else for me. But as she said that, I felt a feeling of dread in the room. Now, I'm not sure if she was truly mistaken or if she really saw something, but I know my aunt had gotten mistaken last week thinking I was out in the garden with the cats when I was with my grandmother at that time. I don't know if I'm just paranoid and taking this too seriously, but I'm mostly worried for the cats because they were with me both times. Do you guys think the cats might be in danger if this really is an entity pretending to be me? Can it pose a threat to my grandmother as well? And if yes to either question, what do I do? One day I was doing some clothes shopping, and I got a call from my college friend, Jeffrey, to come over and hang out. I told Jeff that I would come over after I left the mall. I was using public transportation. After I get to Jeff's house, Jeff introduced me to his friend Sleepy. Sleepy appeared to be very sleepy and lethargic in the face. Sleepy and Jeff were in Jeff's room chatting about school. In Jeff's room, we hung out and talked for a while, but I had to go, so I decided to leave after about an hour. I shook Jeff and Sleepy's hands before exiting. As I exit Jeff's room and into the hallway, through the dining room, living room, and down 2 flights of stairs, I'm at the front door. As I slowly open the house's front door, I notice that someone is blatantly blocking my exit. I look into the eyes of the person who could be so rudely and purposely blocking my exit, and it's Sleepy. Now, I just left Sleepy upstairs seconds ago, so it would have been impossible for him to be at the front door trying to get in. Though I was in terror because I've lived a long life of ghosts, haunted houses and bad luck, my first complete thought was, this is Sleepy's twin brother coming to visit from home. Because I assumed with all my heart that this was Sleepy's brother, I extended my hand and welcomed him in. I shook his hand and it shook mine perfectly. He closed the door behind us. He followed me upstairs into the second-story apartment, through the living room and dining room and into Jeff's bedroom where Jeff and his friend Sleepy were. Upon entering the room, I was so scared that I was trembling. I quickly sat down on the corner of the bed and gave Jeff a cigarette under the doppelganger's nose. I kinda handed Jeff the cigarette at the same time that the doppelganger entered the room, and the look on Jeff's face was terrifying. He was in disbelief. I looked to give Sleepy a cigarette too, reading him as well, but he didn't want one. I then turned to Sleepy, as he also sat, and said, "Sleepy, do you have a twin brother?" Sleepy shakes his head and replies, "Nah." As Sleepy stared at the doppelganger in the face, he seemed to almost cower, but he kept eye contact. The doppelganger was breathing furiously and was super strong. As it stared back at Sleepy intently, I watched him through the mirror because I didn't want to catch any eye contact from the doppelganger. I remembered to take note that the doppelganger had no reflection. After what seemed like an eternity, I slowly stood up and calmly walked out of the room behind the doppelganger and left the house. I have no clue how it all played out in the end. All three of our families experienced multiple deaths. Each time I saw Sleepy or Jeff in public, it slipped my mind to ask them how they got the doppelganger out of the house. My father and my uncle had this experience when they were kids. Fair warning, it might get a bit lengthy. My father and his elder brother, my uncle, were like best friends from childhood. My father used to live in a joint family and used to live in a very small village called Maharashtra State, India. The village is located a bit in the jungle with a population of hardly 500 to 800 people at the time. Farming was the main occupation with little to no electricity and also a lack of wall clocks, so they used to decide on their time according to the daylight. It was around 1966 or so. Now, I know it sounds like medieval times, but that was the situation for tribal people in India. So my father, then 8 or 10 years old, and my uncle, then 15 or 16, used to get up early in the morning, like around 4 a.m, and used to go into the jungle to cut the wood for daily needs like cooking, etc. But before that, my aunt, their elder sister, used to make some breakfast for them, like bakri, which is a kind of Indian bread, and sabji, curry. She either used to pack a tiffin for them so they could eat later, or used to deliver the food by herself in early dawn with my grandfather, who used to start the farm's work. The jungle was near the farms, and my father and uncle would go to a familiar area of the jungle which my aunt was very well aware of. She used to track them down easily, have their breakfast together, and then come back together with the wood logs. One day my uncle and father got up early in the morning as usual. It was still dark, and it was winter. Sunrise is a bit late during this season. My aunt was still sleeping, so they decided not to disturb her, and they picked up their axes and went for the jungle. That day, they decided to go a bit further than usual in the jungle, but in reality, they went way too far. They were not even able to see the lantern lights of the village. They started cutting a tree and gathering little sticks from around. They got very busy and concentrated for the time being. After 1.5 hours or so, my uncle got very suspicious as to why the sun was not rising yet. By this time, there were supposed to be birds starting to sing, and no rooster was making that typical morning noise. No cattle were mooing, which comes along with the shepherds. All that there was an eerie, deep silence. It was so silent, in fact, that my uncle got worried that they were more early than usual time, so he started to hurry up in his work. Now, before going on any further, let me be very clear about my uncle. He is a very tough guy. Nothing scares off the dude easily, and is respected by the whole village. Same goes for my father. But this time it was different. He didn't know why, but he was feeling that there was something very wrong, and something is watching them from deep jungle, and my uncle knew it better. It was not some tiger, cheetah, jaguar, or wild boar. He felt something was wrong that day, and then, all of a sudden, my father and uncle heard the voice of my aunt from a long distance. They couldn't see her, it was just a voice. My uncle got very suspicious, as the voice was coming from deep jungle, and not from the direction of the village. My uncle told my father to tell her to come to them, so my father responded to her voice, and told her to come to them. The voice stopped for a moment, and then she replied, "No, you come to me, hurry! I've brought you your favorite food." At this moment, my uncle realized what it is. He had heard a lot of stories from the villages of a voice which takes away people, sometimes never to be found again, or, if found, will be in a suicidal mental state. The locals used to call such paranormal entities as chakva, meaning the paranormal being who will hypnotically fool you to commit suicide. As soon as my uncle snapped out of his thoughts, he realized that my father, being a naive kid, started walking towards the voice and started responding to my aunt's, or the entity's, voice. It was taking my father's name and yelling, "Come to this direction. I'm waiting here with the breakfast." My uncle ran towards my father with full speed, grabbed him by his shirt collar and said, "Don't listen to her. Come on, we must go home." My father said, "But it's elder sister. She's calling us. I am hungry." By that time, my uncle has already grabbed my father's hand and told him, "She's bluffing with us. She has no food. Now come on." Now my father was about to start arguing with my uncle, but then he looked into my uncle's eyes. He certainly looked scared and his hand was shaking. Father too sensed that something was wrong and started walking fast towards the village, without a word uttered. "Why are you going towards that side? Come here, follow my voice," she said. My uncle, still holding my father's hand, said, "Ignore her. She's not coming to us anyway." No need to say he was trying to divert my father's attention and play it cool, so that he doesn't panic. As they were walking towards the village, they felt like as if it was an eternity to get there. Now, being a Hindu by religion, my uncle started mumbling mantras of Lord Rama, a Hindu god. The voice slowly started fading away as they were coming close to the village. My uncle took a long sigh of relief when the dog started barking all of a sudden from the village direction, and noticing that some of the village lamps were close by. The whole village's dogs gathered together and started barking and making that loud crying noise, like wolves. My uncle reckons the entity might have still been following them. My uncle and father almost started running towards the village, and finally reached the village. The voice was long gone, and there was this sense of lightheartedness. My uncle stopped near our ancestral temple, joined his hand, bowed his head and said thank you. My father was still confused of the situation. Once they reached home, my uncle and father saw that my aunt was still in her bed. Father, being a naive child, cursed her for beating them in the race. Turns out they both left the house way too early, as in at 2 a.m. or even earlier. And it was a no moon night, so it was dark already. My father got a fever for a few days, when my aunt told him that she didn't get up that morning, let alone making their food. But my grandfather and uncle knew better, and are thankful to God to this day.
So, last year, my uncles decided to retire, thus changing their city home for a house in a smaller place. I went to help them move, and the weirdest thing happened in the house. I would see my family, aunt, uncle, cousin, and a helper, in rooms that they were not in. And they also saw me. These encounters were recurring, and you could even chat a bit with whatever was mimicking us. And then you realised the other person wasn't in the house, or was in another room. We were all so busy packing and everything that we didn't notice until we sat down for dinner, and someone would say something like, "You offered to go grab me a beer and didn't come back." And the other person would deny ever holding that conversation. We also felt observed while in the house. It was an awful sensation, so much that we went together to get the laundry or take the trash out. Things we would normally do alone. At the beginning I was scared, but nor my aunt or uncle reacted to this. They just said that when they bought the house, 30 years prior, it happened too, and it stopped after a few months. I forgot to mention, it was a month of us moving. During that month, the toaster, the microwave, and the oven just started malfunctioning. The toaster even caught on fire, and something inside the microwave exploded. I have a theory that now that they were selling the house, and with all the movement, whatever was there awoke and started making itself known.
I had a haunting 9 years ago. I was a single mother with a 2-year-old boy and my 9-year-old niece. I had gotten custody of my niece due to her mother being an addict. We just moved into a nice apartment and I was so excited to be able to give my kids a nice place. It was newly redone. New carpet, new walls, new trim, new everything. It was a weird setup though. When you walked in, my bedroom was on the right, living room on the left, and dining room straight ahead. To the left of the dining room was a smaller bedroom which also had its own full bathroom. I think it was more for roommates than a family. I started having paranormal encounters the same day we moved in. So I always left both bedroom doors open at night so I could see into the kids' room past the dining table. From the start, I would wake up at 3:12 a.m. every night. A lot of times, my son would too, but would start crying. I would wake up to an old woman in my room. She would always stand in the hall that led to the master bathroom. She would always try to talk to me. I could never hear her. Then my son would cry and I'd go comfort him and go back to bed. But sleep was hard to come by for me. As time went on, she would bang on the walls where the water heater was, jiggle door handles, knock photos off the wall, wake me up every single night at 3:12 a.m. She got more and more angry that I wasn't doing what she wanted, I guess. So eventually, she started appearing as a black smoke-like mass. She would get closer and closer, mumbling something I couldn't make out. My cat would flee. I could feel her anger. I could feel the tension and frustration thick in the air. When she wasn't that black mass, she appeared more tattered and unkempt. Her hair would be a mess when it was once done up so nicely. She would look so tired, sunken in eyes, and became more and more frightening. Her behavior was downright aggressive. The banging became so loud that neighbors could hear it. She would rattle the doors violently. I thought someone was trying to break in, but no one was ever there. My dreams were cruel torments of me being raped, murdered, having my children kidnapped, every night. There weren't many nights that I didn't cry myself to sleep. I was doing my best to raise 2 kids, one of which wasn't mine, work a full-time job, and then come home to so much negative energy. I decided to ask my neighbors about previous tenants, as they'd lived there for years. Apparently, a woman took care of her elderly mother. Her mother died in my room. The apartment was totally redone because that woman literally had to wallow in her own feces. The daughter was very neglectful, and the pets were also never cleaned up after. I also found out the reason I was able to afford that apartment was because the rent was significantly lower than other identical units. The manager of the apartments never told me any of this. Shortly after, I woke up again at 3:12 a.m. But instead of the old woman or blackness, I saw my son squatting on a dining room chair. I said, "Troy, why are you up?" He looked me straight in the eyes, smiled his sweet smile and whispered, "Mama." I got up to get him. As I reached out for him, he just vanished. My heart sank. I couldn't breathe. I thought something happened to him. I ran into the kids' room and they were both fine, sleeping away. I cried until I was totally exhausted and finally fell asleep. That's when I decided to break my lease and move. She would unpack boxes. She would hide things. She would turn the bathroom light off when I was in the shower. She was trying desperately to talk to me, and I had no idea how to listen. I mourned for her. I could feel her pain, but I also had a family to take care of. I had my stuff packed and moved in under a week. If you have any idea what it's like to be a single parent with 2 kids and a full-time job, then you know that was an amazing feat. I had a dream after we moved that there was a diary hidden behind a water tank. Why I never thought to look in there, when that was where she kept banging. I just hope she found peace.
My grandma's house has some sort of mimic. I think that's the right word for what it is. But I've also seen people call similar experiences doppelgangers. So maybe that's the right term? My grandma's house has had weird goings on since, well, before I was born. Mysterious ringing phones in the basement, TVs, and VCRs with minds of their own, bassinets that rocked by themselves. Anyway, it seems one of them may be a mimic. My grandfather had a job that would take him out of town at times. On at least 2 separate occasions while he was gone, my grandma and uncles saw him walk down a hallway and out of sight. They thought maybe he'd come home without them noticing, but his car wasn't in the driveway either time, and he came home later, and he insisted that he had not been home. My mother also claimed that she used to talk to her deceased grandmother at night sometimes. It scared her, because she knew that logically it wasn't right. But it was her grandmother, so she felt safer about it. Knowing about mimics now, it probably wasn't her grandmother. And now, my personal experience. My sister and I used to spend weekends at my grandmother's house when we were younger, through high school even. We all slept in her bed, and my grandma would make us bacon and hot cocoa for breakfast in the mornings. I woke up one morning. I was still in a state of half-awareness. I opened my eyes and saw my grandmother leaning in her bedroom doorway, looking at me. I figured she'd just come up to see if I was awake yet. But then she leaned backwards, out of the doorway, and out of sight. Something about the way she moved just wasn't quite right. And that's when I realized I smelled and heard bacon cooking downstairs. It struck me as odd that she would walk away from bacon while it was on the stove. She was in her 70s at this time, and though she got around well enough for her age, taking the stairs was still a bit of a task, and it took some time. It didn't make sense that she would risk burning food on the stove just to come upstairs and look at me. She could have just yelled up at me to see if I was up. I called out to ask her if she was upstairs. From where I was, I could see out the bedroom door and down the stairs. She walked from the kitchen to the bottom of the stairs and said no, she was making bacon. I freaked a little. I got out of bed and booked it downstairs. My sister was already awake and downstairs with my grandma, which is why she was already making bacon before I was up. Both of them said that she had not been upstairs, so I told them what had happened. That's when my grandma told us the stories I told above, about seeing my grandpa when he couldn't have been there. So, yeah. I've been a little bit scared of my grandma's house ever since.
Background story. I used to live in Moab, Utah with my mum, her boyfriend and the boyfriend's brother, at a mobile home park. She worked as the mobile home park manager and pretty much took bills for people for rent, sign up new people to move in, help with issues around the park, etc. So she knew everyone's name there because it wasn't that big of a complex. So fast forward to us living there for a while. It was around 2 or 3 p.m. and I'm sitting on the couch in the living room, just chilling on my phone, waiting for my mum to get home because it was a boring day that evening. As I'm sitting there, I hear clear as day my mum yell my name. I heard her yell in distress, "Tiff?" Now some may think that someone else was named Tiffany in that park, but since my mum worked as the manager, she knew there was no one else in the park named Tiffany. And she is the only person that calls me Tiff because I prefer to go by Tiffany. So I'm sitting there thinking, what does she want? I figured she would yell my name again if she really needed me. Then a few seconds later, I heard her scream, "Tiff!" This time she sounded more annoyed that I didn't answer her the first time. I sat there and thought to myself, her boyfriend's brother is outside on the porch smoking at the time. If she needs me to go out there, he would come inside and tell me that she needs me. So again, I stayed quite prepared to leave if I heard her again. And sure enough, she yelled Tiff again. She let that yell kind of drag on. So I knew she wanted me for something, and I thought she needed help. So I got up and was about to walk out the door when the brother came inside, and I asked him if my mum was calling me. And he just kind of stared for a second and said, "No," like I was crazy or something. I called my mum to ask if she was calling my name, and she said, "No, I'm at the store right now." I got off the phone and thought to myself, why the heck did I hear my mum screaming my name? Not just once, but 3 times, clear as day. When she yelled my name those 3 times, it sounded urgent, but not urgent enough for me to get up and run towards her. To this day, I think it was a mimic, because I'm the only one that heard her, when the brother was outside and could have heard it much better than me. Good thing I didn't leave the first time and went off searching for her on my own.
About 6 or 7 years ago, a group of friends and I would hang out at a specific home being rented by 2 people in our group, one of whom I was dating. Relevance to come. The home itself was a duplex, and the guy who lived in the other side of the home was a friend of the group, and rarely ever home. On multiple occasions, we would hear voices throughout the house. Once, while I was showering, I heard the front door open and close. Then the distinct sounds of footsteps coming through the living room. When I got out of the shower to check, no one was there. There wasn't even a car parked in either driveway. My partner at the time had a fully fledged conversation with what he thought was his roommate, only to discover that he'd been talking to thin air. Oddly enough, that incident also occurred while he was in the bathroom getting ready for work. He heard his roommate come home, kick his shoes off, and proceed to ask him a few questions about his day and what he was doing. When he came out of the bathroom to continue the conversation, he opened the door to total darkness. No one was home, and the lights in the house were all off. One night, while having drinks with friends, I went inside to pour myself a refill and freshen up. Suddenly, a few members of the friend group rushed in, panicked, one of them holding his pistol. They proceeded to ask me what was wrong, and that they heard a man's voice outside, followed by my voice, crying for help. I assured them that no such thing had happened, but they were all insistent that it was my voice. There were countless other voices heard, especially those that mimicked the two permanent residents of the home and members of our friend group. Boot prints appeared on a wall in one of the bedrooms, proving absolutely impossible to remove. Most people constantly felt watched while in the home. Some people were slapped, others scratched. And eventually, no one would stay more than a few minutes alone inside. Not to mention, sleeping there was damn near impossible, due to the noises and the general dark feeling throughout. A door leading into the kitchen from the carport would fly open, despite being shut, and even, on a few occasions, locked. The house to the right of the property had a fenced-in pool, and on more than one occasion, when the kitchen door would fly open, so would the gate to the swimming pool. This house was not occupied. Most of the homes on the street were built in the 1950s and 1960s, so the history is recent and fairly innocuous. Unfortunately, in a horrific turn of events, one of our closest friends eventually shot himself while in his truck in the driveway during a party. None of us know if it was truly intentional or just a horrendous accident, but I've not been back to that house since 2014, and I can barely drive by it without feeling physically sick.
I was 15 and chatting on Gmail with my boyfriend at the time, past midnight. I believe it was 2 or 3 a.m. Whether or not I had the door slightly opened or shut, I do not remember. I heard my doorknob rattling, and I'm like, oh, I'm in trouble, because I wasn't supposed to stay up that late. I heard my mum whisper my name. She sounded annoyed. I turned around, and it wasn't my mum. It was this weird misty white figure that kinda looked like the painting, The Scream. Freaked out, I tell my boyfriend what happened, turned back around, and it was gone. I went to my parents' bedroom and they were both asleep. I woke up my mum to tell her what happened, and she told me if I see it again, to pray and ask what it wants. I didn't see it again until a few weeks later, or a month, I'm not sure, in the daylight. Nothing happened though. I was only walking down the hallway, and I looked at the restroom, which was slightly opened, and I saw the same figure peeking at me. This morning I was in my bathroom. The window overlooks my backyard and I had the window open. I kept hearing somebody outside call my dog's name. They kept saying Monty, calling out as if to get him inside. When I listened closer, the voice sounded exactly like mine. Same tone, same deepness. It sounded as if it was coming from my own backyard, or perhaps a neighboring yard. I looked outside and saw nothing. No movement, no person, no dogs. I got a chill, and after a minute, the calling stopped. I figured maybe it was my mother, although the voice sounded identical to mine. When something scary happens, you try to rationalize it, you know? So I made my way downstairs and past my mother's room, where she was getting ready for the day. I asked her if she had let the dogs outside. She told me she hadn't been downstairs yet. When I went downstairs, Monty and my sister's dog Ruby were both laying on the sofa, exactly where I had left them when I went to the bathroom. I know it sounds insane, I do, but I also know what I heard. I heard my own voice calling out to my dog, as if trying to get him inside, which is a regular occurrence. I don't know if this is paranormal or a glitch in the matrix or something else, but I'm still rattled about it.